suitable for social housing projects. I'm going to get that attached to the handouts as well. We will also send you a list of the restructuring zones. There was a question around Hartbeespoort. I don't see it on the current demarcation, but I think engage the SHRA and they will let you know if that province in Northwest is busy working on adding to their restructuring zone, so that you can get a sense of whether it's happening or not. If it's not happening, please go and engage the local municipality to see if they can't add it in as part of their spatial planning work that they do. So go to the town planning department and the human settlements department. So those were two questions that were still outstanding from yesterday. In the questions that we found on the chat, there was a question from Lucky around whether social housing can be part of a mixed development or a mega project. We covered that yesterday. We said, yes, it can. It would be whoever the developer is of that mega project would then approach an accredited SHI to do the social housing piece. Then from Malcolm Parker, he was, well, not only asking a question, but also sharing some information about the Western Cape. In the Western Cape, I'm assuming he's talking about the city of Cape Town. They do release land for social housing. You've got to be a partner of the city as an accredited SHI, in which case they will then release land to you. So they do have a very sophisticated and rental housing strategy that works. It gives land at 10% of market value to social housing institutions that have been appointed as their partners. And they also give other rebates, like they have reduced rates, they have reduced building plan approval fees, town planning approval fees are reduced. Some of their fees, like the DC cost, are waived or they reduced. So there's a whole package of support that you can get from the city of Cape Town if you are a partner of the city. We covered the Hartbeespoort thing. There was a question around, so how do we get land? Either you're going to acquire land via a private purchase, or you're going to approach your municipality to see if they have a pipeline of land. The SHRA does work with municipalities where there is a request from the municipality to work with them to prepare a pipeline of land parcels for social housing. So it doesn't happen with every municipality, but the SHRA does work with municipalities that does approach it to come up with a pipeline of projects. So you can work with the SHRA, you can work with the HDA, or you can go to the municipality itself to find out if they have a pipeline of land opportunities for social housing. Then there was a question again from Malcolm around giving guidance on the software solutions. We don't recommend any solution, but we do know that within the sector, about 99% of the SHI's managing stock are using MRI. And it's probably because they don't have any other options, because MRI is bought out every other property management system in South Africa. But there are also those that use certain modules of MRI, and they use PayProp with it, or they use the TPN software and they use, but even TPN has been bought by MRI now. So we have TPN, we have PayProp, we have MRI, and those are the three systems that are most widely used. MRI being the top one. Other than that, you have very few SHIs that go the homemade route where they develop their own little system. It doesn't necessarily have all the functionality required, but there are some SHIs that are small and that don't require these big systems, and so they go for their own little homemade system. So I hope that answers that question. There was a conversation between Malcolm and others around the Western Cape Land Department. So the province is also very active, but I haven't had the experience where they do provide land directly, they do work through their municipality. So if there is provincial land at Public Works, you would find the Human Settlements Department working on releasing it, but then releasing it to a municipality for onward release to an SHI. But you're welcome, because again, in the Western Cape, the provincial, there's a dedicated unit for social housing, and they're familiar with all the municipalities within the province. There's several contact people, but I think it's Gavin Wiseman that is heading the social housing unit there. So that answers many of the questions around how do we get land. John, I think I've covered the questions. Those that feel that they did have questions and we missed them, please put that in the chat, and then we can deal with it before we close off today or before we break for tea.
Just as you were responding to those, Rafi, I see that 2-3 more hands have come up. I guess just in follow up to your responses. Can we just maybe take those?
Yes.
And then I've just allowed the mics. So if you can just unmute yourself, let's take Neo and Sitembiso and Tracy in that order. Neo is not coming through.
Yes. Apologies about that.
Oh, there you are.
Am I audible now?
Yes.
Yes, you are.
Okay. Thanks. I just want to take you back to yesterday's presentation. I'm not sure, with the network you come in and out. It's Neo from K-Trade. I heard somewhere there that you would be able to assist, to appoint a service provider to assist, say, with whatever you have problems with, either with what do you call this? Yeah, but let me just say, would you assist with getting a service provider to assist with the building, either bookkeeping, or is that only when the building is under administration, or when you see that we have a problem, would you then come in as SHRA to come and assist and appoint a service provider to assist us to put us back at the right state, and then say maybe for a period of a month? Or is it only when you're under administration? Hope my question was clear.
Yeah, Khafia, I think I'll take that. So now, aside from the consolidated capital grant, which Khafia took us through yesterday, she also took us through, I think, towards the end, took us through the institutional investment grants. There are about 5 of those that are meant to facilitate support work in the sector. So yourself as a potential applicant, or even an already delivery partner in the sector, depending on where your needs are, some of those 5 grants may kick in. In fact, there is a policy document which is really easy to read that we can share with the group as part of the handouts, that sort of tells you what are those support grants that are available and what's the process of applying for those. But long and short is there's the one on pre-accreditation, which is meant to assist those that are seeking to get SHI accreditation. There's one on project feasibility grant, which is just essentially to assist you with plugging in on the gaps on a potential project. It will address things such as your demand study, the geotech investigations, level 1 and 2, as I understand, traffic impact. So just basic outstanding items on your project application. This grant would enable us to plug on those. There is Staff Gear Up, which is more for people that have already developed a first project and they are ready to tenant the project. It's just then enables us to support you with the salary bill of the people that you need, the operational staff that you need. The remedial grant, as you indicated, would be more for projects or SHIs that are in distress, where you are now imminent to be taken to administration. And the last one is the general capacitation grant, which is for but we will share with you the policy guide in terms of what are those grants in detail and how do you apply for them. Let us quickly take Sitembiso and Tracy. Sitembiso, just unmute yourself.
Hi, I just had a question. I was thinking about it yesterday. In terms of purchase of land, does it have to be proclaimed or zoned? Does it have to be, so let's say obviously I approach a seller, and would that land have to be proclaimed or zoned for the 300 units, or could it be unzoned? Or zoned agriculture, or zoned something else, business, yeah. I guess that was my question, yeah.
So,
maybe before...
Okay, carry on, John.
No, I was just saying, maybe before you come in on that, our preference, particularly if a project has to be considered for this investment. This needs to be projects that are ready. I can't remember, Khafi would have given us a site that the approval process is a 90-day process. So your project comes into the pipeline, and within the period of 90 days, it needs to have been considered through the approval process. So as I understand, land that still has to be proclaimed, where township establishment have to be done, it's quite a lengthy process. It could take even more than 2 years in some cases. Mm-hmm. And even when we talk about the support, for example, the project feasibility support, it becomes problematic when we have to intervene in such projects that are still far off the mark. In fact, it becomes one of those wasted expenditure from a fiscal's point of view. So we're looking at more like ready projects, things that have already been resolved, proclamation has been done, and it's just really things just to plug in on minor issues. You wanted to add to that, Khafi?
Yes, just to say that, if you're doing your first 2 projects, you should try and aim for land that is zoned residential already, and you may just have to rezone it to get it to higher density zoning. But to move from agriculture or industrial, whatever the case may be, it's going to take a good 3 years. 2 years is your sort of optimistic window frame. It's going to be 3 years or longer. So generally, that is your project that you are doing 3rd or 4th. When you've got some equity built into SHI, you've got some capital to spend 3 years packaging a project, because as John said, you're not going to get the 750 Rand institutional grant unless you can show that your zoning is imminent, your building plans have been submitted, that approval is imminent. It's at that point where money will flow. And so to get to that point, it means you're going to be for 3 years locked into acquiring a piece of land that is not, the township hasn't been proclaimed, or it's agriculture, and no money is going to flow, and your professional team is going to have to work at risk for that period of time. You're going to find it difficult to find a professional team that will be prepared to do it for such a long period of time. So it's going to be challenging. We don't say no, you can't do it. We're saying there are SHIs that have done it, but it's never been their first project. It's always the 3rd or 4th project where they've got 2 projects under the belt. There is some equity in the SHI, and they're able to take on more complex projects.
Okay, let's take the last one. Tracy, quickly, if you could just unmute yourself.
Hi, just a brief question to confirm the length of time before you can exit on the management side. Is it 15 years or 20 years?
Is that for an ODA? Tracy, are you asking about an ODA?
Yes.
It hasn't been pronounced yet by the SHRA.
And
so
SHI?
we don't know what it's going to be. And I don't even know if the SHRA is busy looking at that yet. But it was meant to be one of the incentives for the ODAs to come into the program, was an exit strategy. What that exit strategy is going to be is we don't know yet.
Otherwise, are you committed then for 20 years?
At this point in time, you're committed forever like an SHI, because there isn't an exit strategy yet.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, I think we've dealt with questions. Obviously, if there's anything as we go along, we'll allow you to raise your hand or put something on the chat, and we'll all obviously open up for Q&As. I see that we have used up much of the time. I would want to suggest that we go into today's presentation. Hafi, I think that is up.
Okay.
Me hand over to you.
Okay. So we now looking at the institutional arrangements, right, which has been set up to enable the program to be delivered and implemented. We did go very briefly through, so some of the spheres of government, we covered that. I'm just going to take you through it quite quickly again. So we said yesterday that the National Department of Human Settlements is responsible for developing the social housing policy program and associated legislation, and that is informed by research that they would do. So currently there's a white paper that is out for public participation, where the National Department of Human Settlements is looked at the environment now. Remember, our policy and our legislation was developed between 2005 and 2008. We're in 2024, much has changed in our environment, and so we need a refresh to our program. And so it is informed by thorough research. They also have to establish the SHRA and monitor the performance of the SHRA, and they've also got to approve the plans of the SHRA. The plans will ask for a certain amount of money. It will say we have a pipeline of projects for 20,000 units. Please give us the capital funding for that 20,000 units. So there would be a plan in place year on year where the department makes a commitment to fund the entire program. And then also they've got to capacitate provinces and municipalities to be able to create an enabling environment for social housing to thrive. Can we move on, John? The provincial government, we spoke about yesterday as well. They used to, well, in the Act, it says they've got to administer the top-up subsidy, but when government wanted to become more efficient, they decided that the top-up subsidy and the restructuring capital grant component must be administered at one shop, so that you don't go to the province to apply and you go to the SHRA to apply for the other piece, and they both have different approval processes. So that's been consolidated. You go to the SHRA, you get both, but you do have to get the province's approval and the municipality's approval before the SHRA can actually fund you. And we'll talk about the forum that's been created, where you go to, where you find all these partners in government sitting around one table. They're responsible for housing consumer education, and they're also responsible for dispute resolution via the Rental Housing Act. They create the tribunals, and the tribunals deals with disputes between landlords and tenants, not only for social housing, but in the entire rental housing space. They're supposed to support local municipalities to monitor the projects that are funded by the SHRA. The SHRA does that monitoring as well. So they tend to do all of this in tandem together. And they are supposed to support municipalities to develop rental housing strategies. In those strategies, we're supposed to see that there's rebates on all the municipal costs, that there is a land pipeline that they can allocate to social housing partners, that they do align their infrastructure development to the social housing pipeline, so that you don't get a piece of land and then you find there's insufficient electricity or sewer services that can accommodate the number of units you're going to build on that site. And then obviously they are responsible for educating the municipalities, both at a political realm and an administrative realm, on the social housing program, so that there is buy-in to that program. Can we move on, John? So you have three spheres of government. You have municipalities, you have provinces, you have national, you've got the SHRA, you've got the HTA, you've got the NHFC. Those are all agencies of the three spheres of government as well. So how do you get to speak to all of them? There's one forum. It's called the Provincial Steering Committee. It is chaired by the head of social housing in the province. And all these parties go to these meetings. Generally, they happen once a month. If there's a robust pipeline of projects or many applicants from ODAs and SHIs, They would generally sit once a month. They have a calendar or a roster for the year. And what do? All spheres of government come together to talk about the pipeline of projects. So as an SHI or an ODA, you would go and present your project there. They would then interact with you on seeing if it's viable, seeing if it's how ready it is, and trying to assist you to unblock any. So they do a level of troubleshooting if there's challenges in moving the project forward. For instance, you have a piece of land and the municipality doesn't have sufficient bulk electricity to accommodate the number of units you're going to do. They will troubleshoot within this forum to try and get prioritization of electricity to that site. So you would find them there. You would have to start there. So when you start out your journey on social housing, yes, you will go to the SHRA, you will become accredited. The minute you want to apply for the capital grant, this is where you start. You present your project to the PSC, they endorse the project. That means all the parties sitting around the table endorses the project. They even give you a letter to that effect. And that letter then gives effect for you to go back to the shrine to say, my project is endorsed, I've presented it, I'm ready to apply for the capital grant. So essentially that is what the PSC does. It's an intergovernmental arrangement that allows a one-stop shop for you to go to get all your needs addressed insofar as packaging and delivering of your projects. Can we move on, John? So municipalities, we say that municipalities are the heartbeat of the program. It is where social housing is catalyzed because the land generally comes from them, the services comes from them. The social housing institution should be incubated by them based on the pipeline of projects they have. And so a very important role the municipality plays at a coalface level, at an implementation level. It is this sphere of government that we have to be most concerned with. Can we move on, John? So this is I just wanted to show you some stock around South Africa. This is a Tembelihle project in the center of Tshwane Metropolitan Municipality. It's about 600 to 900 units. I'm not sure. And you can see here, they've used the central courtyard approach. There's quite a lot of greening going on. And then on the periphery, on the right side, you will see there's some high towers, and then you see 3 to 4 story walk-ups in the center and to the left. Very interesting project, beautiful project right in the center. People literally walk out of their units here and go to their jobs because there's industrial on the one side and there's just the CBD on the other side. Can we move on, John? This is Hillbrow, and this was an old, it's called BG Alexander House. And it was old buildings that was transformed into a number of rental housing products. There is some communal rooms that we spoke about where there's shared ablution and kitchen facilities. There are also that dormitory style beds that we spoke about. So people that are standing on the street corner, if they collect 15 Rand a day, they can go in at 6 o'clock, get a cup of soup, get a shower, sleep until 6 the next morning, and they must be out. You would see that there's that synthetic soccer field or sports field that's in the front of the building. This SHI called Madula Moore Housing Association, one of the most successful institutions in the country. Their community development programs are very, very advanced. So they have a TV channel that when the kids come from school, they can put on this channel. It does homework with them, it does extra lessons with them, and so on. For me, they have computer rooms. Those people that come into the dormitory beds every night, if they see someone coming in for 3 to 4 nights a week, they will call that person aside and they will see if they can't upskill that person, bring them in as a staff member, and the person becomes employed and moves into one of those rooms, those 12 square meter rooms. And if the person improves and stays and becomes a permanent employee, they can move into a social housing unit, and so on. But this field was built by the Dutch national soccer team. So they have a twinning relationship. Those guys come down once I don't know if it's every year or once every second year. They run a soccer tournament with the tenants, all the Madulamoho tenants. So very sophisticated community development program that they run. Can we move on? In the middle of Hillbrow, making a difference to the entire neighborhood, which you know for a fact was a drug-infested area prior to social housing coming into this part of it. This is East London, my hometown. We have an organization called O'Naven Housing Association. They have these towers. They built, I think the first one, the Facebook one is St. James Park, and the other one is called Skyview. Skyview was an existing building that they purchased and re-kitted out for social housing. And St. James Park, high density, I think it was about a 12-story tower or a few 12-story towers that they built also in the middle of Southernwood, which is an area 2 kilometers away from the CBD and the main hub of East London. Can we move on, John? This is a project called Steenberg in the city of Cape Town. It's a 3-story walk-up, quite a big project as well. Beautiful architectural design. Is quite old already. It's more than 10 years old, and you can see that because these pictures were not taken when it was built, it's taken recently, and you can see that it's still neat and clean. They're doing their maintenance, facilities management, and everything is working well there. Move on, John. This is also Steenberg. You can see the mountain in the background, Table Mountain. Good views for these tenants. And the urban design and layout is good. And you also see the solar panels on the roof. So they're trying to look at energy efficiency within the project. Much of the things we spoke about yesterday, you would see in the project. The urban design and layout is interesting as well. Move on, John. Okay, so that was just some pictures of what happens at a local level in various municipal areas. From a municipality point of view, they must demarcate RZs. So where we had the question around RZPs yesterday, please go to your local municipality, ask them if they have any intention through their IDP planning or their SDF planning of demarcating because the way in which you describe that node developing and the types of development that's happening there, I would imagine that it would be an area that should be considered for social housing. So they've got to, through their spatial planning dispensation, they've got to look at social housing and where it's needed. They've got to prepare the application, submit it to the MEC of the province. The province then endorses it and they send it to the National Minister for gazetting. Now, it all sounds like a long drawn-out process, and it used to take 7 to 8 years to get an RZ demarcated, but with our current ministry, they're extremely efficient. We've had demarcation happening in 2017, 2019, 2021. We had 2022, 2023. So you would see when municipalities are making submissions now and provinces are submitting to the minister, they are not wasting time. They are gazetting those zones. So it's not that much of a long wait any longer. The second thing that municipalities are responsible is to identify land, to do some feasibilities on the land, see if it's suitable for social housing. They need to then release that land to SHIs or ODAs for delivery. And they are, because they are constrained by the provisions of the Municipal Finance Management Act, the MFMA, they have to find ways to release it to social housing institutions, because generally they would release it at no cost or a very low cost. And secondly, they are supposed to procure it out open to the market and realize market related fees, but they don't do that for social housing. And so they have to find a way to transfer the ownership of the land in a way that doesn't fall foul of the MFMA. But I think most of the municipalities are now familiar with the way in which you can release land, and they have found out ways of releasing land 2 ways. One, they would do a long-term lease with you, or alternatively, they would do an outright sale. They would have to have an agreement with the delivery agent, the ODA or the SHI, that will enable them to release the land preferentially for social housing. And so there would be those agreements, those performance agreements between the municipality and the delivery agent. Then they can also provide you with capital and operational incentives. From a capital point of view, there's the urban development zone rebates that you can get. Those are in the metropolitan municipality areas where there are UDZs demarcated by National Treasury. It doesn't happen everywhere. They can also give you reduced pricing on the land. They can waiver or have reduced DC cost. Their town planning fees can be reduced. Their building plan approval fees can be reduced. They can also reduce parking ratios. So you know that the parking requirements for our developments are generally 1.2 parking bays per unit. And so, you know, if we can show that we in the CBD, that people are walking to work, not every tenant needs a car, we can actually ask them to reduce it down to 0.8. There are SHIs that got it reduced down to 0.3, but that has come back to bite them because people do have cars. I mean, besides walking to work, they do have to drive elsewhere. And so you would find, especially now that we're catering for people earning up to 22,000, we find that we do have more people that have car ownership. And so it's not advisable to reduce it too low. I mean, it's also what you can afford. But one parking bay per unit is something that I think should be acceptable and should be workable for SHIs. And then obviously they have the contingency subsidy policy. So all your tenants earning under 3.6 a month, I think that's the cutoff amount to enjoy the contingency subsidies that the municipalities offer. They could register for that subsidy and they could then get the benefit of the reduced utilities cost that those people qualify for. They also can offer you reduced rates. I mean, the city of Cape Town is an exception, but whatever people pay for an RDP house as rates is what social housing pays. But I think it's very unlikely that you would get that anywhere else. Other municipalities do not have the financial means to give you those big rebates and big discounts. So you should ask for it and fight for it, but you may not get all of it. Thanks. John, can you move on? And then we have our government agencies. So we have the Social Housing Regulatory Authority. They're here to regulate the sector, so they accredit you. You get the grants, they invest in you, and then they regulate you to see that you're using the grant that they gave you as per your grant agreement. You're housing the right income groups. You are not distributing the profits to anyone as an SHI. You're meeting all the regulatory requirements. You're well governed. You're providing good tenant management services. You're maintaining the properties, all those good things. Those are the things that they would regulate you on. And then they also build capacity of the sector. They do these training programs. They administer the 5 institutional grants. All of those contribute towards the development or the capacitation of the sector. We have the NHFC, which is the National Housing Finance Corporation. They were set up by the National Department of Human Settlements to provide developmental type of finance to the housing sector, not only social housing institutions. So you would find that access to debt funding is available from the NHFC. They do sometimes co-share their debt funding with other commercial banks, also on an affordable basis, and they do have a certain level of a guarantee scheme. So if you need bridging finance or things like that, you could structure it with them. And then we have the Housing Development Agency, the HDA. They're responsible for identifying and preparing land for housing development. And so what the SHRI is trying to do is they're trying to have an agreement with the HDA where the two of them work together on identifying land and buildings, and that they make it then available to accredited SHIs, which is held within the SHRI. So when that whole agreement comes through, I think there will be that avenue as well. Besides knocking on the municipality's door, You could potentially knock on the SHRA's door, would have an agreement with the HDA for a land pipeline that they may be holding, and which is suitable then for release to social housing. So I want to spend a little bit more time on the role of the SHRA, because that is the most important stakeholder to incoming SHIs and ODAs. How do they work? How do they operate? How do they execute their mandate? I think it's important for you to understand that, because they are your go-to organization. So again, just to cover the mandate, they've got to regulate, they've got to invest, and they've got to build capacity. Their responsibility is to accredit and regulate not-for-profit SHIs. They've got to award and allocate funds, the CCG, the Consolidated Capital Grant that we spoke about yesterday, that is worth the 428,000 Rand per unit, to social housing projects. So in the case of a SHI, they will allow the accredited SHI to apply for the grant and award that grant and oversee the delivery of the project. And once the project is delivered, the project and the SHI will be regulated. In the case of an ODA, the ODA, they would accredit the project. But in saying that they accredit the project, they're accrediting three things. They're looking at the institution of the ODA and do they have the capability to develop and manage the stock. They will look at the project itself to see if it's viable and ready for funding. And once it's funded, they will also monitor the performance of that. So they will want to see that their ODA is managing the stock, giving it to the right income groups, charging the right rentals, managing the stock, doing the maintenance, the rent collection, and all of that. So there's two different processes for the two different types of delivery agents, but very much the criteria and the regulatory criteria are the same for both. And then they've got to invest in the projects that are brought, well, the applications for the funding against projects that have been packaged for social housing. Can we move on, John? We've spoken about the way in which they regulate. They accredit to first against those 7 KPIs. We said it's legal form, not-for-profit, good governance, financial viability, property management, tenant management, and property development. They would monitor compliance on a quarterly basis. You would have to report on the project and how the project is performing, and your institution and how your institution is performing. And if there's non-compliance, they go the legal route, which is the administrative route. And in Section 12 of the Social Housing Act, it is very clear that they will do a turnaround, do remedial action. If you don't improve your services, they would then institute a forensic investigation. Whether null administration is found or not, if you're still not performing, they can apply to place you under administration. They will put an administrator into your SHI. The administrator will then see if they can turn the business around. If they can't, they will then recommend that the organization get shut down, its creditors get paid, and the net asset get given to another SHI. The SHRA then oversees that entire process. From an investment point of view, there's 2 types of investments into your SHI or ODA. There's the capital investment called the CCG, the Consolidated Capital Grant, which goes into your project and is set against the capex of your project. And then there's institutional grants. We spoke about the 5 grants yesterday, starting at pre-accreditation and ending at a general capacitation grant. Then from a sector development point of view, there are some general training that happen, which is like today, people that are interested to come into the sector, trying to get the numbers of accredited SHIs up so that we have sufficient delivery capacity. We have the general type of training happening, which is introduction to social housing, how to become accredited, how to package your project. Those are potentially the 3 general training programs that happen to everybody so that we can draw people into the sector. We need new people into the sector. We need more delivery, and via accreditation, we do get more delivery happening. And then we have very specific interventions going forward. So it's about how do you do your maintenance? How do you do your rent management? How do you do your community development? How do you do your tenant management? How does housing supervisors do their work? How does the client services management staff do their work? There's then very specific interventions where very specific SHIs experiencing problems in those various aspects get invited to come into training by John's unit so that they can improve that level of service that is required to happen. And then there's also capacitation of the public sector, so it doesn't stop with SHIs and ODAs. We said that municipalities play a catalytic role in the delivery of social housing, and therefore it is in the SHRA's interest as the sector leader to capacitate municipalities so that they create these rental strategies, and they do have the pipeline of projects, and they do have relationship with SHIs and ODAs, so that delivery and implementation of the program can happen. But they also take responsibility for capacitation of provinces, because it is no use if the municipalities are capacitated and their provinces can't take their anything that needs approval by the ministry forward, because they themselves are not capacitated. So there's a public sector program as well that the SHRA manages from a sector development point of view. Yeah, and then from a policy and research point of view, they have a dedicated policy unit within the SHRA, and they do their own research on the basis of what is the demand situation in the country, what are the supply constraints, what do they need to research around supply, what should the grant be. They make motivations to the Ministry and the National Department of Human Settlements about additional restructuring zones, the grant quantum, the types of agreements that they need to have with provinces and municipalities and so on. So there's a big research agenda that happens within the sector through the policy unit of the SHRA as well. Can we move on, John? So we spoke about the criteria that drives the accreditation, but let's talk about the process. So you want to establish an SHI, you are a founding member, you find a few other members that can join you, and you decide we want to do this thing. You've come to this training, you understand what the program is now about, and you would then approach, if it's an SHI, it would be Zanele at the SHRA, the accreditation unit. If it's an ODA, it would be Sanele or Chalombi at the SHRA, the accreditation unit, and you would ask for the application pack. They will then send you what we call a fact sheet. And that fact sheet will ask you a few questions, but in the main, it would just ask you a question around, are you an institution? Did you register your company with the CIPC? Do you have land? What is the, what type of offer do you have on the land? And have you already spoken to the municipality and the province about wanting to package that land for social housing? Once you complete the fact sheet, within 3 days or so, they will come back to you and say, here is the application pack. It's a folder that they would send you with a whole lot of subfolders across these 7 key criteria areas or key performance areas. And in it would be a guideline document that says, this is what you need to do to package your application. Here are some templates and tools. This is what we expect of you. They give you all the details on how to package the application. And you would then apply. They have then 90 days within which to give you an answer. It's legislated in the Social Housing Act. They generally would give you assessment. They would do a pre-assessment and send you a checklist to say, so we asked for 20 documents, you send us 17 documents, we are the rest. You would then provide them with all the rest of the documents, and that would allow them to move you to the next stage where they have an external assessor who would assess this. So you will have the assessment template in the accreditation pack. Please use that template to guide you in developing the documents that you need to develop, because it gives you good advice. It says, we want a board charter from you. In that board charter, we want to see the purpose of the board charter. We want to see the roles and responsibilities of the board. We want to see what the role of the chairperson is. We want to see what are you going to delegate as the board to committees and to the CEO. We want to see what the roles and responsibilities of the CEO is. We want to see how your meetings will happen. What constitute a forum? How, how much notice must the board be given before that? When do the board packs go out? How is decisions being made? All of those things, they will tell you what they want to see in the board charter. So That application pack has got some advisory stuff in it. It's got some tools and templates in it, and it's got the folders that you've got to populate with your documents, your organizational documents. Once they then, they have the internal approval process. I think they have about 3/4 that sits before it goes to their full council. Their council is like their board of directors, who then takes a final decision and says, yes, we agree, we will accredit you. You will then get an accreditation certificate, and you will be registered on this public register of accreditation, which is then published on their website. And then there is a process of withdrawal of accreditation. It can happen in 2 ways. One, they withdraw your accreditation because you're not complying, or you ask to withdraw your accreditation and hand your stock over. So there's a whole process around withdrawal as well, and that completes the accreditation system of the SHRA. Can we move on? Okay, so this is how they monitor compliance. You're now accredited, right? And when you're accredited, you're not going to meet all the, you'll never be a fully accredited SHI on your first try, because you can only be a fully accredited SHI when you have stock under management and when you are meeting all the SHRA benchmarks or the social housing benchmarks. Only then can you become a fully accredited. So you will be conditionally accredited, and you will have some compliance conditions that need to be met. So you will get your certificate of accreditation, and attached to that certificate will be a letter of compliance. It will say to you, you have not met the full requirements of your board charter. What is outstanding is you didn't put the constitution of the board and how that happens in your board charter. So please do that within 3 months. We're giving you up to this date to resubmit a revised board charter that meets these requirements. So already, besides them monitoring compliance, they're already giving you something to do, right? Because you're going to have to meet those things within the period that they put in your compliance notice. So that's the first layer of compliance monitoring. The second layer is a quarterly reporting tool. So you have now gone to the investment unit, you've got your grant funding for your project, you've built your first project, and you've tenanted the first project, and now you have to report on what is your rent collection rate, what is your vacancy rate, what is your cost to income ratio, what is your debt service cover ratio. All of those good things, are you solvent, are you liquid, is all in this quarterly reporting tool. It's a spreadsheet they would send to you. You would have to populate it from your management accounts, and you would have to attach your management accounts to the reporting tool and send it to them, and they will then, if there's any area that you're not complying with or any benchmark that you're not meeting, they will then issue a new compliance notice that says, on the basis of our assessment of your reporting tool, we find that you are not meeting these benchmarks. You've got to meet it within the next 3 months or the 6 months or whatever the case may be. So that is the quarterly reporting tool that you will have to do. It is not only about the performance of the project that you have developed and managing, but it's also about your institution. Is your institution meeting the benchmarks required by the social housing regulations? The next area of compliance monitoring happens on an annual basis. So on an annual basis, you have to submit an annual business plan with an annual budget. They will monitor your quarterly reporting against that. So if you said in this year, I'm going to build 300 units, and by Q4, the 300 units will be tenanted, they will monitor that that is actually going to happen. So you have to submit 3 months before the end of your financial year, a board approved business plan. Every time that you change your lease agreement, you have to send it to the SHRA, and they would have to approve it first. If ever you change your MOI or your company registration, you would have to submit that to the SHRA as well before you can make those changes, and they will have to approve it or agree to it. So on an annual basis, they will send you a questionnaire and say, have you changed your lease agreement, yes or no? Or they would say to you, please send me your current lease agreement. Please send me your current MOI. please send me your current CIPC registration. So they will then check to see whether there's no changes from the previous year. They will ask you for your business plan, and they will capture the strategic goals of your business plan and the targets that you have set, and they would monitor your performance on the basis of that business plan and that budget that you have set for yourself. That is on an annual basis. On a 3-yearly basis, they will do two things. They will do a building condition assessment of your projects, and they will see whether that has fed into your long-term business plan. So if you said every 3 years I'm going to paint, and they will check then that you're making a maintenance reservation for that painting, and they will check that you actually have done the painting, and the building condition assessment will include that assessment of those works that you have done. The second thing that they would do is twofold. They will check that you are housing the correct income groups. So it doesn't mean that if someone moved in and they were earning 22,000, and a year later or 3 years later when they do the tenant income audit, that person is now earning 27,000. It doesn't mean they're going to ask you to ask that person to move out. They will only check those incomes of the units that turned over. So every new tenant that you put in must be within the target market. And by the way, it must be in that split of the 5 segments. So if we said you're going to have 5% people earning between 1,850 to 3,500, then you must keep that 5%. So 5% of your vacancies that happen will have to go to that income group. So they will do that tenant income audit every 3 years with you to see that you're housing the right people. They will also do a tenant satisfaction survey with you, and they will check to see how satisfied tenants are. When there's low levels of tenant satisfaction, the STRA views it as a serious risk. It views it as a rent boycott that is going to emanate, and it starts to monitor your compliance on the basis of that imminent risk. Then there's another outlier of the compliance monitoring system where, for instance, through the quarterly report, you sent your last board minutes. They saw something unusual happening there, something that's out of line with social housing, and they themselves then institute an inspection, either an inspection into the board or inspection into the CEOs or the management or the unit, a particular unit within the organization, and they will then investigate further why there is stress in that particular area. And so they can then call that inspection at any given time. And it would be on the basis of what they pick up through the other mechanisms that we just spoke about. So I spend a lot of time on this because I want you to be absolutely clear that you come for this money, you build the project, and then your work really begins. You have to have the skills and capacity to be able to meet all these requirements. And there's a reason for the stringent requirements is because government is using the public purse to fund your project. Up to 70% of the money that you get is coming from the public purse. And so they've got to protect that. They've got to ensure that that money is being used for the intended purpose. And that is why they have this stringent regulatory framework, is because they need to protect their money, that they've put their investment into your business. So we've spoken about enforcement. You go into trouble, you ask for a remedial action grant, or they force a remedial action grant on you. The grant is in the form of a service provider who is a specialist in the field where you're having trouble, who comes in to troubleshoot and assist you to improve in that area. If that doesn't work, there's a forensic investigation, maladministration is found, administration is the next step. Removal of accreditation then happens. Inevitably, it would result in the winding down of your SHI and the disposal of the stock. So let's talk about how to access the capital grant, right? So we know that the objectives of the social housing program is economic, spatial, and social integration. We spoke at length about it yesterday. We know that the income groups are 1,850 to 22,000. We know that 30% of the stock must go to people earning 1,850 to 3,600, And we know that 70% of the stock must go into that secondary market, the upper bands. We also know that there's social housing minimum standards, technical specifications, and that is the first handout that we're sending to you. It's a guideline on the social housing specifications. We know that your project must be supported by provincial and local governments, so they must endorse it. You go to the PSC, they say they're going to endorse it, and they actually give you a letter to that effect. So the letter will say, we support this project. It's a project located on this earth number. It is going to yield so many units. And we are going to support the project in terms of town planning approvals and building plan approvals and all of those things. They may even go to the extent of telling you what your township establishment rules are in that letter of support. From a provincial level, they will just say to you, we support this project, this is the location, this is the number of units we support. That is an absolute prerequisite of what is required in terms of provincial and local government endorsement. Your project must be located within a restructuring zone. So the first thing we do, we say to you is go to your town planner, let him download the map of the restructuring zone because it has a physical boundary line, and then let him locate your project within the RZ and use that map. When you get the fact sheet from the SHRA, which is even before your application happens, you're able to send that map with your offer to purchase or your sale agreement or your title deed that you own the land. You send that map with the fact sheet so that the SHRA can see, yes, your project geographically it's centered within this part of the restructuring zone. The next thing is that you must meet the criteria for conditions precedent and financial closure. So what would happen? You would apply for the grant. The SHRA would say, okay, it's viable. It's not quite ready. And you need to do these three things before we can actually sign a grant agreement. But even when you sign the grant agreement, there may still be a few things outstanding, like your building plan approval is maybe not reached yet. They will give you 4 months. They will create conditions precedent in the grant agreement. So you've signed the grant agreement with 2 big conditions. One is a list of conditions precedent. It will say within 4 months, you must get building plan approval in place. You must have your zoning approval in place. And a few of those types of critical things will become conditions precedent. Financial closure means that you must have a term sheet from your debt funder. So when you apply for the grant, you will be required to submit an in-principle letter from the NHFC or your bank to say, we are going to consider funding this project, right? It's a loose letter that gets you through the application stage. But once you sign the grant agreement, you will have 4 months within which to get to financial closure. And you will literally have another 3 to 4 months thereafter to have registered your bond, right? Because what happens is the grant money will flow first and then the debt funding will flow second. So your bond must be registered for that money to flow when it's needed. And so your financial closure will have those 2 hurdles that you need to meet. The second thing is, the next thing is that there are certain KPIs that you must meet, right? From a financial viability point of view. There's an IRR of prime plus 4.5% that you must meet. There's a debt service cover ratio of 1.3, meaning that not more than a third of your project must be funded via debt. There must be a maintenance reservation provision made within your financial model of 1.02%. These are just the top 3 indicators. There's 2 or 3 more. There's a cost to income ratio that they also want to see, but they provide you with the financial model. You've got to input your CAPEX, you've got to input your OPEX, which includes your debt servicing. And then this model has got a cover sheet, and in the cover sheet, it gives you the outputs. It tells you whether all these hurdles are met, and it gives you a summary of what is the cost of your project, who are the funders to your project, what is your projected income statement over 20 years, what is your projected balance sheet and cash flow statement over 20 years. The model spits out all of these answers for you. So it is quite easy for you to see if you have a viable project or not by using this model, which is a prerequisite for the application for the grant. And then for the private sector or the ODAs as we know it, they have got to show that they have a minimum of 20% equity contribution. It's cash equity, so it could also be vested in the land. You're an ODA, you're coming with your own land, you've got a valuation certificate that says the land is valued at 20 million rand. By the way, 20 million rand was the 20% that you required, so you have shown that you are putting in equity. Those are requirements for application for the capital grant. Can we move on, John? So this is the three things that when you apply for the capital grant that the SHA, the investment unit, will look at. They first do an organizational due diligence. So if you're an SHI, the only thing they're going to look at is that you have a accreditation certificate, and they're going to look at that first compliance notice. But the accreditation unit will sit in on their first meeting where they will talk to your accreditation status. They will say, yes, they're conditionally accredited. They have these 5 conditions that they must meet. They've met 3 of them so far. There's 2 outstanding. It is a problem or it's not a problem. This is their status. In the case of an ODA, they would be looking at this for the first time. They call this a quick scan A. You would have to complete the entire quick scan A, which is the same requirements or very similar requirements as the SHI. The only thing that is different is that the not-for-profit requirement is not part of your requirement. Other than that, they're going to look at financial viability, tenant management, property development, legal form. So it's just the not-for-profit that doesn't apply to you, but you would submit this application together with the technical application, together with the financial application. Whereas the SHI would have had the organizational due diligence done already via accreditation, and it would merely be the certificate that they would then produce at this point in time. The second requirement would be the technical requirement. Again, you will get a folder from the SHRA. It's called Quick Scan B. It's got 13 subfolders. For instance, you'll have to attach the RZ that your project is in. Your town planning documentation will have to be in another folder. Proof that the bulk services is available from the municipality would mean the municipal letters are there. Proof that the internal services have been designed. Your engineer's reports will have to be in there. Your market demand study is one other folder. Your building plans will be another, and your, what do you call that other thing? I will tell you later what it is. Your NHBRC enrollment will have to be in there. Your procurement, you'll have to show how you procure the professional team and all of that. All of that will come into this folder. And then the third folder that you will get is called a Quick Scan C folder. It's got that financial model in it. And it will included in that will be, if you bring in your own land, the valuation certificate. You would have to have the provincial letter of support for the number of subsidies that you're going to be asking for, your municipal letter of support, and your debt funding letter. Either it's the term sheet or it's the bond registration or it's whatever would be in that folder. Now that Quick Scan C folder will become almost your Bible going forward, because if you say, I'm going to charge these rentals, these are going to be my staff costs, these are my direct property costs, sorry, you are going to be monitored through compliance monitoring on the basis of what you put into the Quick Scan C. The grant will be administered on the basis of the capex that you put into the Quick Scan C. So that becomes the third leg of the application for the consolidated capital grant. It's these 3 pieces, and each of them have their own application pack, and each of them have their own supporting documents required. We know who can apply. It would be a combination of SHIs and ODAs. We did explain that SHIs will have to be conditionally accredited to be able to apply for the grant. And we said that ODAs will apply for all 3 at one stage. We now want to move on to what is a social housing institution and what is a other delivery agent. And we're really almost at the end of our training. So John, I don't know if you feel this is a moment to take a break, or should I continue? Or should we take some questions?
Yeah, I think let's do Q&A quickly, and then take a 10-minute body break and take this last section when we return. So I'm just going to unmute and enable your mics. If we can just have a few hands on the last section that has been covered. Excuse the background noise. Working from home today, it's a bit of a mission. So let's take a few questions and then we take a body break after that. Luando, I see your hand. Are there any more? Oh, Malcolm, you the second, and Tracy. So if you just unmute yourself, Luando.
Good morning. Thank you very much, John. Good morning, Khafi. I lost 1 hour of the session today. Load shedding happened. We were on load shedding at 8. So I lost 9 to 10. We just had the electricity back now at about 8 minutes past 10. So I did ask this question yesterday if we are going to get a recording of this session so that we can refer back to those things that we might have missed starting from yesterday. That will be my first question. And I was wondering, this is my second one. I was wondering even yesterday if we are going to be taken through the registration process of both the SHI and the ODAs, as we are part of this program. So that will be my second question, if we are going to be taken through the registration process, because it would be nice to get ourselves registered as soon as possible. And what is the time frame of the completion of such registration will be my other question as well, because I would also like to know if a company can register for both, because our company has got both the registrations. We are registered as a non-profit company and as a PTY. Can we register the non-profit for the SHI and the PTY for the ODA? Is that allowed? Thank you very much. I hope my questions were clear. If not, I'm willing to recap. Thank you.
John, do you want to take more questions or could I respond?
Yeah, let's just respond on each as they come.
Okay. So the first question is will you be taken through registration process? I'm assuming it's registration as the accreditation process. There is a training program called the Business of Social Housing. John, am I correct? Yeah. And that training program does cover the how to become accredited, what you need to do to become accredited. So, and John puts out his training schedule for the year. So you can engage John on what that schedule looks like. But I would assume that that is the training program that you need to attend. But then I also heard in the same question, there was a question around registration of the company. And you then raise the issue that you have two companies. There's a non-NPC and then there's an ODA. And that takes me to your second question. So you can register an SHI and an ODA, but my question to you would be, why would you do that? What would your motivation be to do that? Why would it be necessary to do that? Because I would imagine that if you as a founding member decided that I want to participate in the social housing program, your motivation must be then, am I participating as a not-for-profit company with these altruistic motives, or am I participating in the program with altruistic motives, but with a profit motive as well? Because that will then answer your question as to which way you want to go. Why would you want to do both? For me, I'm grappling to understand why would you want to do that, because potentially you will come up with a conflict. If the SHRA is to accredit you as an SHI and the SHRA is to accredit you as an ODA, and you're sitting in both entities, and these both entities are competing for the same social housing pot of money, and there's a limited pot of money, who are you going to go for? And also, how are you not going to feel conflicted by sitting on one and not the other? So there's a potential for conflict as well that I'm foreseeing. But I think we'd rather hear from you as to why would you want to do both?
Okay, the intention is to participate in the provision of alternative housing for the people, which is the objective that our company is registered for, and the objective of why we are participating even in this training. So I was just asking to find out if there would be, is there potential of a conflict? That is the reason for my question. I wanted clarity on that. I wanted to see if there is a potential for conflict. Now that you've mentioned that there is, we have to. I will have to settle with registering for one, but I'll obviously have to go back and do some consultation with the shareholders to be able to determine which one that will help us more towards our objective. So that's the reason that I asked the question. I wanted to find out if there was a potential for conflict. Now that you've mentioned, I think it's a little bit clearer. Thank you.
Yeah. I think it's important that you did that. And then in addition to that, when you're making the consideration, and this does come in that training program I spoke about, but let me share it with you now. There's the issue of taxation, right? If you're an NPC, you will apply for tax exemption, meaning you're not going to pay company tax. If you operate as an ODA, you're going to have to pay tax because you're a for-profit company. In the case of an SHI, because you're not for profit and you don't really have a track record, it's much more difficult to get debt funding. But we do have a mitigating risk against that, in that the NHFC is there to provide the debt funding. Whereas as a PTY LTD, showing your the track record of your performance of your ODA or your PTY LTD, it would be easier to raise funding. So those are the other two sort of big considerations that you have to do. And the third one is, as an NPC, it will be easier for you to go and raise donor funding to help you with your community development program. But as a PTY LTD, you're not going to be able to raise any social grants or anything like that because you're a profit-making company. So for me, those are the three big considerations that you also need to consider besides the conflict issue when you speak to your other founding partners.
All right, let's take Malcolm. If you can just unmute yourself, sir.
Yeah, thank you. So my question also relates to the ODAs and the SHI, so maybe follows on from the previous question. I firstly wanted to ask specifically about the land and that land that is released and potentially released to an ODA or an SHI, whether the likelihood that land from a municipality would be more likely to be released to an SHI than an ODA. So that's the first one. And then the next question relates to, I didn't actually know about ODAs. I only discovered that in this training. So I'm, trying to get my head around the things you were speaking about in terms of what is the benefit of having an ODA. And I think the one thing that came up for me, and obviously there's not a clear indication from the SHRA whether it'll be 20 years or however longer that this land can maybe be, or these units can be given back. But at the moment, people staying in the unit didn't have the possibility to buy that unit. It'll be a rental unit forever. And I think that's one use case that I can think of, is that if you're an ODA, you could have a model that allowed you post the whether it's 20 years or whatever, that you now allow these people to actually go on and follow a and have an opportunity to buy it, maybe convert to a rent to buy model or something like that. So could you answer those two?
So Malcolm, on the first one, it's a mixed response because you have municipalities that will say, because we're releasing land, at below market rates, we will only do business with not-for-profit accredited SHIs. But I've seen increasingly municipalities have become less risk-averse and are releasing to ODAs. And I think the motivation for that is that they believe that the ODAs generally come from a development background and have the capacity to develop large projects. And so they're releasing land because they want delivery to happen quicker. And so it's a mixed bag. I can't say to you categorically there's some that's very risk averse and say only SHIs and only SHIs with a track record that has already managed units and that is fully compliant and fully accredited with the SHRA. And then there's other municipalities that say, look, we're so desperate for delivery, we're opening it up to everyone. So they actually do the open tender route and they call for big developers who are interested to become ODAs, and they actually allocate their land to those guys. But you would find that in the title deed, they will register a suspensive clause over it to say we have first right to the land if anything happens. The SHRA also registers against your title deed the same clause, and so does your debt funder. So between the three of them and SARS, they have first rights to the property, and there's that suspensive condition over the title deed, or that's registered against the title deed, to make sure that they protect their land and that you don't go and you do other things with the land other than social housing. So there's no definitive answers. Municipalities take these decisions on the basis of how risk averse they are and how desperate they are to get delivery going.
Okay.
From an exit strategy point of view, I mean, that's exactly what I would have thought would have been the thinking behind the exit strategy or the incentive for exit for ODAs is that, you would be able to offer ownership to the very people that you have housed over. They've improved their life circumstance and they are now ready to own. They've saved while they've rented with you. And essentially the same people are benefiting. But until, I think what you guys have to do is you have to write to the SHRA and say, I want to be an ODA. I understand the funding model. I understand the equity model. But I want to understand what is the exit incentive so that the SHRA can also be forced to pronounce on such a thing. They can say to you, no, it's never going to happen. We've taken this incentive out. Or yes, it is going to happen. Give us time. We're thinking about what it's going to be. So that the sector does get some type of an answer about what is there going to be an incentive around exit? And if it is, what is it? But we can't answer that question now.
Yeah, absolutely. And then maybe just, sorry, one last question that I thought of is related to the amount of the grant capital. Is there a amount that is ring-fenced for SHIs only and ODAs, or doesn't it work that way? In other words, is there more grant capital available if you have an SHI rather than an ODA?
No, there isn't a formula for that. It's based on the most ready projects are going to be funded first. So whoever knocks on the SHRA's door with a project that meets all that requirements that we just spoke about under the investment program and is ready to go, those are the projects that are going to be funded first.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Because Malcolm, you raise an important question. We in the fiscal environment that we're in, the SHRA is facing reduced capital grant funding from the National Department. And on the basis of that, it's the most ready, most viable projects that are going to be funded. At some point, we're going to be competing for that money.
Okay, thank you.
Is it Tracy? I think Tracy, you're next.
Thank you. I just want to find out the financial model that you say that you have. Will we only have access to that after accreditation, or could we get that already with this pack?
We can send you a quick scan. See, I don't see it as being a problem, John, because, if you familiarize yourself with it and you start playing around with it, it's going to help you in looking at what is that first project you're wanting to do.
Brilliant, thank you.
Yeah, but remember, John also has training. John, is it called the project packaging? What is the name of that training program?
Yeah, that's the one, project packaging.
Yeah. So there's a project packaging course you might, because then you'll actually get training on how to use the model as well. What is the inputs and what is the capex and so on. So we can send it with this training, but we also advise that you attend that training. And I think that one happens soon as well, or it's happened already, John?
Yeah, we had for this financial year, which effectively comes to an end of March, had planned the sessions, and those have been run to date. However, had a number of inquiries about that topic, and I've advised that people that still need to do that one should still go into the link. Remember the link that we sent you to RSVP, and there is a selection there, Tracy, that you can just tick on the thing. We would then use the number of RSVPs that have come through on that topic to assess whether we could perhaps give it the last step before we have to return a closeout report on this capacitation project. So I'd advise the same for anyone else. Go into the registration thing, register for a thing. I think at some point next week or week after, I would have to just pull in the numbers and see whether it warrants us running it for the last time. If that is all from Tracy, let's take Motape. Lwando, I see your hand. I'm assuming it's a fresh question. So maybe we'll take you last before we take the comfort break. Motape, just unmute yourself.
No, thank you. Apologies, colleagues, because we have load shedding here. We normally go on and off. I've got two questions. One is related to conflict of management. I'm not sure if it was touched. Can a member of an SHI be a member of two SHIs at the same time in different communities? That's the first one. And the second one is, in our case, our SHI, the one that we're planning to establish, is responding to a particular need. And mostly it's a need that has always been there. And most of the leadership in the community are people who are unemployed. Some of them don't have a good financial standing, and they have been elected to steer this process. So how does that come into play where a person is not in good financial standing in relation to their participation in an SHI? And the last one would be the link for the project packaging workshop. I'm not sure whether Mr. John is referring to the current workshop where we have to click for RSVP, or there's another link that we have to click on, because we are hugely interested in that one. Thank you.
Mutapi, so the conflict of interest question is, yes, there is a conflict if you are a director, a non-executive director of two SHIs. The SHRA definitely views that as a conflict. It's not going to be allowed, right? So they see it as potential for conflict at a number of levels. The one is the example that I used over the past few days, where both SHIs are competing for a grant, and there's only grant for one. Which hat are you going to wear? Which community are you going to choose to serve? You're definitely going to be conflicted. And also it's around performance of the two SHIs. You are going to be conflicted when it comes to that. And it's also around procurement for resources as well. Even though you paint the picture that they are located in different communities, at the end of the day, social housing doesn't only draw people from a community. It draws people from many communities which may be in conflict with each other. So there's many levels of layers for conflict. And I'm assuming that you're referring to directors of the SHI and not staff and so on. So the second question you had is that many of these people that are within the community that will sit on the board of directors of the SHI are not in good financial standing. again, that will not be allowed by the SHRA, because when you sign your application form for accreditation, and when you sign the director's qualification forms, one of the requirements of the SHRA is that you are in good, you have no bad track record insofar as credit is concerned. You must not have been having any cases against you for financial mismanagement or any of that. So you would sign to say that you meet those requirements, and if you don't, you won't be able to. So unfortunately, people that are not in good financial standing will not be allowed to be directors of an SHI. And the way in which the SHRA would check that is they do a credit check on all the directors, and they also do a company registration check to see if there's any cases pending against any of the directors. So all of those checks will be done, and the criteria doesn't allow for that. I hope I have interpreted your question properly and answered it as well.
To an extent you did, but the last one you partially did, because I'm not only talking about, for example, bad financial situation, but I'm saying some of them have no financial history, as it were.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah. No, if you're someone that has no financial history, there's no issue. I mean, in them becoming directors of the SHI.
I think though, part of the question that he's not asking, and I guess it's part of what you probably will be dealing with in the next section, is the skill sets and the competencies that you require to put in there. But just to the question of the link, use the same link that you've used to respond to this one. We have not created a new link with a new set of dates for the project packaging. So when you go into the link, you'll see project packaging. It's probably going to refer you to the old dates. Just choose the November date, if not mistaken, that was the last one, or December date. I'm able to, when I pull the responses, see which are the responses that came in the last let's say month or so, and those are the ones that I'm going to be able to use. So use the link that you use to respond. If you're struggling with that, I will share you my email, which you should have, but I will share with you my email and we can resend you the link. Londo, I was just not sure whether your hand is it's a new question or is this a legacy hand?
Thank you, John. One question wasn't answered. I asked if the recording will be available for us after the session.
Yes, we did indicate that not today when we finish. I think I'd allow the guys to assist us with downloading the things and putting them onto YouTube, because the whole recording comes as a YouTube on a YouTube platform. So just allow us probably meet next week, that I'll do a mail shot with those links and other handouts as well. But yeah, we'll share that. Guys, I think it's 10 to, let us take a 10-minute comfort break and come back to conclude on the last remaining part of the presentation. Thank you. Don't lock out. Hafi, the evaluation, I think the guy who's Kumbuzo has managed to do it on the forms. So I'm going to just put in a link and then they will just use that link and do the things. About 5-6 questions at most with the multiple choice. So I'm sure it's a quick one that they'll be able
So
to
how
do.
does it work now, John? Explain it to me.
I think your son-in-law was on point when he said we should create it on forms and then just export it in as a link.
So do you see it now on your screen?
Well, I haven't because I've been sharing and all that. So I was gonna do that now that we're going on a break to just see if, but I'm sure it's easy because I can just take it from the email which she has sent it and then paste it in here.
Okay, then what happens is you share it with all the attendees, then I will be able to open it and I answer and I press submit. Is it that simple?
Yes. So what it's going to do, it almost, when it comes to our side, it'll come in as a spreadsheet thing. that gives us those analysis to say how many people have responded positive to this question and so forth. So it already does that. I think you can even create graphs and things like that even with such data. Yeah. Are we good? Is everyone back? Just thumbs up. Is a presentation still up on your site, Khafi?
Yes, it is. It's not in that mode. Can you put it onto the presentation mode?
Oh yeah.
Thanks. Can I start?
Let me see. I think I moved a few slides forward. Okay. Now I can't see you. Wait. And show first. Oh, there we are. Okay.
Okay. So just to remind you guys, we now are talking about SHIs and ODAs, and in terms of delivery, what is expected of you. So there's actually a definition to a social housing institution in the Social Housing Act. It says it's an institution accredited or provisionally accredited under the Act, which carries or intends to carry on the business of providing rental or cooperative housing options for low to medium income households. So it excludes any ownership on an affordable basis, ensuring quality and maximum benefits for residents and managing its housing stock over the long term. So clear definition, you're an entity, you have to be accredited, your intention is to provide rental housing stock. It goes on further to say who you need to accommodate is, via your affordable rental, and it talks to the management of your stock and your tenancies. Can we move on, John? If I had to take that and put it into a picture for you, this is what SHIs would do. They would acquire, they would develop, they would own, and they would manage social housing stock. Essentially, SHI is a not-for-profit business, but it's also not a loss-making business. So you have to be business orientated. It's a marginal business because of the limitations of the rental revenue imposed on you, because you're receiving the capital grant. There's a limitation of how much rental you can charge. We spoke about 3377 being the average rental that you would charge in your projects, and that from a makeup point of view, you are a social entrepreneur. You have a strong focus on developing and managing tenants that are poor and vulnerable, and that your programs or your service offering deals with that vulnerability. So your community development programs are centered around those types of vulnerabilities. If I had to talk about an ODA, the ODA will have to do the same 4 things, but they can outsource everything. They don't have to do internally, whereas a SHI cannot outsource these core functions. They must do it themselves. Yes, they can outsource portions of the management of the stock, portions of the tenant management, but the core of it has got to be contained within capacity within the SHI. Can we move on, John? So there's also very clear provisions around what SHIs do. They facilitate the development and undertake the management of social housing stock and the linked tenancies. In some instances, they can undertake the management of crew projects. If the municipality says to you, you're a social housing partner, I'll give you land, but I also want you to manage some of my crew stock for me, there's an option for you to do that. They must promote the creation of quality living environments for these low-income residents. Quality living environments doesn't just mean the roof over your head, but it's also those services that you offer in respect of rental maintenance, community development, and all those good things. They must reinvest any operational services into further social housing projects. So you can't take out any asset or take out any income and pay it to directors or do anything other than furthering your core business. The main object of an SHI is also unambiguous. So we had some statements saying that you want to cater for the community, you want to do affordable housing. Affordable housing is broad, social housing is very specific. So your main object must be the delivery of social housing to low-income tenants. You must apply and achieve accreditation, and you must comply with the accreditation requirements. Can we move on, John? You must establish and comply with annual performance agreements that you have with the local authority. So for instance, if you are a partner of the local authority and you do get a piece of land from them, they would say to you, look, I'm giving you 5 hectares. I want 550 units built over it. You will build it over the next 3 years. And I want to see so many units delivered every year. So there would be a performance agreement which will have to be monitored between the two parties. You must consult with residents around the housing projects. There must be meaningful participation. So you mustn't just say, I did something to tick a box, but it must be meaningful. You must inform residents on issues relating to consumer protection. So if there's any new requirements insofar as consumer protection is concerned, you must share that. You have a responsibility to share it with the tenants. So for instance, the one thing that we find is the SHIs are not keen to let tenants know that there's a rental housing tribunal, that if they do have a dispute with the SHI, that they can go there. So they hide that fact away from tenants. Why do you do that? I mean, give them the right. If you know as a landlord, as a social housing landlord, you're doing everything right in terms of the Rental Housing Act, why would you be scared of the mechanisms available to a tenant if they don't agree with you or if they're in dispute with you? Let them know these things up front. Be open and upfront about it so that you don't prevent tenants or tenants don't trust you because you haven't told them certain things or you haven't shared things with them. Observe and operate best practice. Absolutely. I mean, there's no reason for you to try and reinvent any wheel in social housing. The top SHIs, they do that. They pay the school fees. They're willing to share how they do things with you. So you must operate within best practice. You don't have to, you know, and if you don't, you are going to eat, you're going to eat problems along the road. And then you must meet the norms and standards for social housing. And that is the guideline document that we would be sending to you with the pack. Can we move on, John? So for ODAs, the legal form is different. It would be a PTY Ltd. If it is an existing company, so for instance, you have an existing company and the existing company is in the mining business. The SHRA would want to see you setting up an SPV within your company where we can ring fence the social housing piece. Remember, we have to protect the state's investment, or the SHRA has to protect the state investment into your company. Now, if the mining business goes belly up and the social housing project with government funds is sitting in the same company and the company has to be liquidated, we're going to lose our asset, or the SHRA is going to lose the asset. So we can't have that happen. So what they're going to expect of you is, if it's an existing company dealing in other businesses, that you have set up a SPV within that group that ring fences the social housing grant, so that if anything goes wrong, they can attach the project. Or if anything goes wrong with the other businesses, this piece is ring fenced. It can't be attached with the rest of the business. So that is an important component. From a project accreditation point of view, they look at the institution itself and the capacity to develop, to manage, and to own the property. And so you would have, if you are outsourcing it, they would want to see the outsourced arrangement. They would want to see an SLA between you and Trafalgar Properties for the rent administration. They would want to see a SLA between you and a big development company if you're outsourcing the development role. And they would want to see a track record of that developer or that property manager that you're outsourcing to. They would want to see their BEE profile, and they would want to see how they're performing on other projects that they're managing or developing to be able to satisfy themselves that you do have the capacity and your outsourced service provider has the capacity to manage the stock or develop the stock or whatever it is that you're outsourcing. Can we move on? So here is how to get started as an SHI. You have an idea, you've heard about the social housing project, you've heard about a project opportunity, there's a piece of land somewhere or there's a building for sale that you can refurbish or retool or whatever the case may be. And you feel that you want to work on the basis of a not-for-profit company, or you want to work on the basis of a profit-making company. So your motivation about why social housing, you have to be clear about. You would have founding members. Those founding members generally would become the non-executive board of directors, and potentially one of them could become the CEO, which could be an executive director. The skills that the SHRA look at on the board of directors, the non-executive directors, there must be a built environment property development skill. So it could be an architect, a town planner, a QS engineer, someone from that space. There must be someone that has got financial skills. So someone with a BCom, someone that has done financial accounting, someone that is a CA potentially is even better on the board. That person must be more qualified than your financial manager sitting in the business, right? Because if the financial manager reports to the board, there must be someone in the board that can interact with those reports. There must be a legal resource on the board. So if there's any contractual arrangements or any type of legal advice that is required, there's someone from within the board that can provide some expertise around that. There must be a property management expert on the board. And that property management expert can have community development skills as part of their skills as well. And then there must be an HR skill on the board. So there's 5 skills required on the board, and it's not negotiable. The 5 board members must have those qualifications. So it's no use you saying, I was a CEO of a company before, I managed 20 staff. No, they want an HR qualification with some experience. Then you must have your land for your first project, because without a first project, you actually don't have an entity. You can't start a business, right? You can't take your product to market because there isn't a product itself. There isn't a basis to start the business. Can we move on? So how do you establish? You've decided you're the founding members, you have the board of directors, they have the 5 skills, you have an opportunity to acquire a piece of land. How do you start establishing yourself? The first thing is to set up your legal entity. You've decided now whether you want to be an NPC or a PTY Ltd. You then register with the CIPC and you register the 5 directors with the CIPC. You've set up your governance structure. Remember, there must be a majority of non-executive directors. And so if you have those 5 skills and you decide your board is going to be consisting of 5 people, 4 of them are going to be non-executive directors, and 1 of them is potentially going to be an executive director who's potentially going to become your CEO. You got to then put your board policies in place. What are those policies? It's your board charter, it's your code of conduct, it's your risk management policy, it's your legal compliance policy, it's your fraud and corruption policy, it's your anti-discrimination policy. Those are the types of policies that you would require from a governance point of view. So you're setting the scene for the board of directors and the way in which they will operate. But also taking into account the needs of, so risk management sits solely a responsibility of the board. Even though you delegate it to the CEO, you are ultimately responsible for it. The next thing you need to do is to set up your strategic plan. right? Because as a board, you're responsible for the strategic direction of the business. You have to set your strategic goals. You have to set your vision and mission. You have to say what type of business are you operating? What is your guiding principles? What values will you live by? All those good things in that. And then you will do an environmental analysis. You do a SWOT analysis, a pestle analysis. You would do a market demand analysis. You would do an organizational analysis about what type of organization you need, because you know what your first project is. Your first project is 300 units in this municipal area, in this suburb. So the market demand study must tell you whether there's market demand in that suburb for social housing. What is the profile of that demand? Your organization will say, so it's 300 units. I will need this. Oh, this is what I need. I need a CEO. I need a finance person. I need a client services person. I need a property management person. And these are the staff that I would need under them. And this is what it would cost. So can I afford it? The rental revenue from 300 units is 5 Rand. My staffing cost is 2 Rand of the 5 Rand. It's within the 40% band. It will work. All your plans will come out of that strategic plan. You'll have a financial plan, a project development plan, a tenant service delivery plan, which will consist of tenant management and property management, which includes rental management, maintenance management, facilities management, all of that. You will have a risk management plan. When you've done your SWOT analysis, you would have identified what are the key risks you're facing as an organization. What are the plans that are going to mitigate those risks would be contained in your risk management plan. You will have an internal management plan that says, this is how I'm going to deal with document management, strategic planning. This is my business information system. This is how I'm going to manage ICT. This is how I'm going to manage information management. I'm going to collect it. I'm going to store it. I'm going to analyze it. I'm going to use it in a certain fashion, and so on. So that strategic plan is also almost prescribed by the SHA. They give you a template. They tell you what they want to see in all the chapters. And if you follow that, it does help you as a business as well. It's not just ticking a box to become accredited. Obviously, with those plans, there would be two big models that go with it. It would be your annual budget for your first year, and it will be your 5-year projections. But sometimes you would even give a 20-year projection, because you would just use the pro forma financials that come out of the Quick Scan C. Though the Quick Scan C is only geared to give you the result of a project by project basis, whereas if you're doing 3 projects in your first 5 years, you may need another model that consolidates the results of all 3 projects into the 5 years. Then you've got to develop your operating systems, which is your operating policies and procedures. Those are the policies and procedures that are going to run your business, your financial policies and procedures, your tenant management policies and procedures, your property management policies and procedures, your property development policies and procedures. Essentially, that makes up your operating system. From that, you've got to develop your organization. Now, remember, you're at a point where you're not earning any income, right? You're still packaging your first project. You're still applying for the grant funding and the debt funding, but you are establishing a business. So you may say to yourself that the board is volunteering until such time as the rental comes in. Each board member is going to be responsible for some of these aspects in a way until the management team is appointed. And then at that point in time, the board moves to non-executive role. They oversee the business, they provide strategic direction to the business, and the management team takes over. You will have to find a middle road of how you're going to deal with this SHI in the time frame that it takes you to get to tenanting your first project and rental revenue coming in that will be able to cover your cost. And those are the things that then will assist you to apply for accreditation and become accredited. So these are the key phases or things that you need to do or steps that you need to take to establish your business. You have to do all of them, and you have to do them all at the same time. Because remember, time is your enemy here. The longer it takes you to set up, to package your project, the longer it takes you to get to a point where you are generating rental revenue. So you need to get to a point where you generate rental revenue as quick as possible without sacrificing what you need to do without sacrificing all these steps, because if you sacrifice one of them, you are setting your business up for failure. If you take a shortcut on one of these things, you're setting yourself up for failure. You are going to fail. So you need to do this. You need to do it in the shortest possible of time. You want to get to a point where you generate revenue as soon as possible. So I want to take you through, there is a project packaging course, but I want to take you through the steps, because packaging your first project is what gets you to your rental revenue, right? And you want to get to that as soon as possible. So better you know and understand what it is that you need to do to package the project. So you found a piece of land, and you need to validate whether that piece of land is suitable for social housing. There's a few things that you need to do. You need to identify whether there's demand for social housing. And so that demand study will tell you that. The second thing is you need to understand then whether the land is suitable. So what portion of it is developable? Is there any restrictions or servitudes running or anything that restricts you from developing the whole piece of land? Potentially that will then inform you how many units you can get on that land using the following densification strategy. One, if you're getting a greenfields piece of land, and you're in an area where you can only go 3-4 story walk up, you want to avoid the lift story, or you're not going to be allowed to do a tower of 12 stories in that area, then you'll be able to work on 110 to 120 units per hectare. That is the numbers you will use. Please write that down. If you are in a CBD of Johannesburg and you find a piece of land, there's no height restriction, right? So then you can even work on 500 units per hectare, depending on how high you want to go, right? So you need to do that. How many units are you going to get off the land? When you've done that and you say, okay, so I'm going a 4-story walk up, I'm working on 120 units per hectare. I'm going to get 300 units on 2.5 hectares. And so let me go to the municipality quickly and see if there's enough bulk services to accommodate 300 units in this area. Is there enough electricity? Is there a substation close by that can take another 300 units? Is there water? Is there sewer? Am I going to have to build any roads to get to the site? And if I am going to build roads, what is the stormwater requirements going to be? If all of those 5 things is a tick yes, then you know there's demand. You know that the service is available. You know what the zoning status is. So it's currently residential single story, but you can change it to residential 3B, which takes you to your 4-story walk up. So that is not going to be a big deal. That's a tick box. And then you do some numbers and you say, so I'm going to get to the 550 per unit. So if I don't exceed that, it's going to be financially viable. You know that. And so you validated that project. The project is a go. It's all of a tick. Yes. You will then now engage an architect and risk and say, give me a concept drawing on this project. You know, how would the buildings be oriented? What can I get out of it? And so there's some preliminary designs that the architect would do. You would test its feasibility. Again, put it through just the back of the cigarette box, some numbers to see whether you get to the 550 and whether it will be financially viable and whether it still meets the demand for social housing. You would then move more into implementation planning. So you start giving the town planner his work. He must rezone it. He may have to subdivide something out or consolidate 2 sites to get it to the 300 units. Maybe it's 2 sites you're buying and you want to consolidate it. The town planning issues, you want to get the engineers also looking at the architect's designs, get the structural engineer to start giving you an idea of what his report or his designs would look like. Your civil engineer would look at the services that has to go into the buildings because the early designs are there. How would the services be taken from the link point to the actual buildings? You would start doing all those types of work and the initial stages of each one will be done. So the design would then be finalized. You would then have more permanent designs in place and all of that, and they would have taken the work to another level. And then you would start to look for a contractor. So you would tender out the contract or the construction element of the project, and then you would do the construction piece. So essentially, there's those 5 steps that you would have to follow. And in the little other boxes on the side with the arrows, it gives you a bit more detail about each phase and what the work involves in each of those phases. But the project packaging training program will give you much more and will tell you exactly how. It will even go into the aspects of at what point do you start applying for the SHRA funding and the debt funding. What are the requirements of those funding applications? It will detail much more than this is just an overarching view of how to package your project and how to deliver your project. So I want to take you through just a high-level view of applying for the SHRA capital grant. You've identified the land, you've confirmed that it's in a restructuring zone. You have got an agreement in place. It could be, if it's a municipality, it's a land availability agreement. If it's a private piece of land, it would probably be an OTP that has a validity period of at least 6 months, because that's what it's going to take, the time you need to get all your funding approvals in place, like the SHRA funding and the debt funding. If it's something that you own already, it will be a title deed that you provide. You would do a feasibility study on the piece of land, and you will document it in a proper project development report. You will say you've looked at the land, there's no restrictions over the land. You've looked at the park services, there's availability of everything. You've looked at the zoning status, you're going to have to change the zoning status. You know, you looked at all those key components, so you'll be able to have a project development plan that begins to identify what your project delivery or your design and delivery is going to be. If it's feasible and all of those boxes have been ticked, you would get your municipal support and your provincial support. You'll be going to the PSC, you'll get all that support there. The SHRA would actually be, by the way, there as well. You would then now apply to the SHRA once you've been to the PSC and you've got the endorsement for the project. You would then go to the SHRA and you ask for the project application, the CCG funding application. They would send you the quick scan A, the B, and the C. That is for a ODA. For a SHI, the quick scan A will just be your accreditation certificate, and then you would have to do the quick scan B and the quick scan C, which is your technical and your financial viability tests. You would also then have to get a letter from the NHFC or whichever bank you're going to say, in principle, they will look at an application from you. And then you would fill in the quick scan B and C, you would submit it to the SHRA, and they would then take it through their approval process. So first they will appoint an assessor. The assessor would assess the project, and they have these 3 committees. So they have a project assessment committee that looks at it first. They make a recommendation to a technical assessment committee, which is the executive management of the SHRA, and they then take it to their council structure. So there's a committee for reviewing projects and recommending projects to be approved, which is their project development and finance committee, and then it goes to full council, and then it's approved. Once it's approved, they're ready to sign a consolidated capital grant agreement. In that agreement would be 2 conditions. It would be conditions precedent with all the conditions that need to be met within 4 months, and it would have a financial closure condition, which means you must come up with a term sheet and the bond at some stage. Once it's signed, the money starts flowing and construction can commence. And then they will monitor the construction process. So that is really the procedure that is followed when you apply for the grant for the project, the first project. Well, every project that you're applying for. If we look at your legal form, what are your considerations? Well, first of all, these are the types of companies that the social housing regulations allow for. It can be a company with share capital, but I just want to forewarn you that if it is a PTY Ltd, there's 4 clauses that the regulations insist on, which then contradicts a company with share capital. It says you can't distribute income, there can be no shareholders, there can be no distribution of assets, and also that you on winding up, you must give the project back to the SHRA. Those are in the regulations. So I can't see how you can be a PTY Ltd and not have shares and then have all these clauses that says you can't take any money out, you can't take profits out and all of that. it doesn't make sense. But anyway, it is there. If you are registering a PTY Ltd, you're going to have to register those 4 clauses in your MOI that says there's no shareholding and you can't take anything out. The most common one to be used is the one in the big text, is your not-for-profit company. You can be a housing cooperative, you can be a share block, you can be a communal property association, you can be a voluntary association or a trust. On all of those 5 that are from the cooperative to a trust, you're still going to have in your MOI all of those clauses that says you can't distribute anything. For an ODA, yes, you'll be able to have share capital. You have to be in the business of either property development or property management or both. And if you are not, you're going to have to set up an SPV that is going to talk to the business of social housing, where we're going to ring fence your social housing project into, so that if anything goes wrong, we're able to extract it out of the business. So from a good governance point of view, we're talking now of the board and we're talking about the governance policies. The important things to think about. So let's use an example of an SHI with a project opportunity of 500 units as a first project. They don't have a second project opportunity, potentially in the first 5 years. That is what they're going to concentrate on. You need those 5 skills on the board. That almost determines the size of your board, because you don't need more board members. The bigger boards that you need is when you have a big, complex business. You have 5,000 units under management. You want to delegate a lot of it to committees, so you need a big board so that you can have enough members to sit on the committees of the board. But as a new starting institution with very limited skills and experience in social housing, it's better that you delegate almost nothing, that you have a smaller board, because you're a small business, you're only going to deliver 500 units over 5 years. You don't need more people on the board, and the board takes most of the decisions themselves without delegating to committee, for the sole reason that they want to learn the business of a social housing. They want to see how to govern a social housing institution, and when they're more experienced, yes, you can extend the scope of the board, because you're thinking about succession, but you're thinking also about delegating more because you're going to be bigger. So important is the size of the board. Important is the skills of the board. Important is the stance of the board. Why do I say stance of the board is important? We said you don't have rental revenue in the beginning, so the board is more hands-off. But the minute the management comes into play and revenue is generated, the board has to understand that they have to move away from becoming operational to being more strategic and more advisory. You know, you always have boards that are interfering in the man. They hire a CEO, but then they want to do the work of the CEO. So your stance of your board is very important, and it's a paper that you need to write, and it's something that you need to live by as part of your early stages of being a board. Your structure and your delegation of authority, we recommend that as a starting organization, you must have an audit and risk committee. And remember, there you can co-opt a CA or a risk specialist onto your board that is not necessarily a non-executive director. Because who would you take from your existing board of 5 members into your committee? It would be your finance person. If you don't have a governance person or a business person, you would probably co-opt 2 members. You would co-opt another finance resource into your audit and risk, and possibly a governance or a risk specialist into the board, because then you would make it a 3-member. It must always be uneven numbers from a voting point of view, and 2 of them can potentially be from outside of the organization. When you're a bigger board and you have 7 members or 12 members, yes, you can populate your committees from the board itself. Remember, the chairperson of your board cannot sit on your committees. And then your governance policies we spoke about. Remember, your board charter and your MOI must talk to each other. Now, you can't say in your MOI, I'm going to be a board of 5 people with these 5 skills. And then in your board charter, you say, no, I'm going to be a board of 7 members. And by the way, they don't have to have any specific skills. These things must talk to each other, right? You must have a code of ethics, not only for your directors, but also for your management and your staff. So it's better to have one code of ethics that everyone lives by. It must talk to protection of assets. It must talk to how you deal with outside parties. It must talk to conflict of interest, just how will the board behave? What can they do and what can't they do? What ethical behavior are you ascribing to? And remember, there's the King Code of Governance in its 4th iteration now. It provides a good sense of it gives guidance to what good governance is. So you should want to subscribe to that in these types of policies. You should have a risk management policy to make sure that the board is familiar with what the risks are, what the mitigating, how serious is the risk, who's going to manage that risk, and all, whether it's internal, external, what control do you have over the risk. That risk management policy must talk to all those things. Legal compliance is another responsibility of governance, of the governance structure. So how are you going to comply with all the legislation applicable to the business you're in? Now, there's a wide range. On the property development side, it's your NHBRC compliance, it is your building regulations compliance, it may even be the Development Facilitation Act when it comes to town planning issues. All of those things you have to comply with as a developer. As a governance structure, it's the Companies Act. You may also want to add the King 4, right? From a staffing point of view, it's all the labor legislation that you have to comply with. From a property management and tenant management point of view, it's the Rental Housing Act, right? From a social housing business perspective, it's your Social Housing Act and its regulations. How are you going to comply with it? So that policy must talk to internal audit compliance and external assurance. Fraud and corruption is a definite governance policy. How are you going to deal with it? How are people going to know that you can register potential for fraud? How will it emanate and how will you manage that? And then it's the governance of IT. So it's your IT policy and how you're going to be dealing with IT. So those are essentially your basket of policies you need to develop in the establishment stage. From an organizational point of view, it's how you're going to design your organization. We know for a fact that the functional areas is tenant management, property management, finance, and internal management, and potentially property development. So if those are the key functional areas, are you going to design your business around those functional areas? Or are you going to say to yourself, well, I'm only building one project in the first 5 years, I'm going to look for another one. And because property management is technical and related, it's about maintenance and that, I'm going to consolidate property development and property management into one functional area. I'm also going to consolidate my back office stuff into one functional area. So I'm going to take finance, IT, HR, administration, and I'm going to make one functional area for it instead of having a manager for each of those things when you're a small organization and you can't afford it. So that's the second thing the board has to think of in the establishment phase. You've got to do your strategic planning. I went into detail about what that is about. And the last aspect that you've got to think about is organizational performance management. So how are you going to manage this organization's performance? You're setting yourself strategic goals and targets to be met in your strategic plan. How are you going to monitor that you achieve that? If you said you're going to build 500 units in 5 years, how do you monitor every time the board meets that you are on track to get to the 500 units? Or if you're managing stock already, how do you monitor the performance of property management? What is your rent collection rate? What is your vacancy rate? What is the your cost component of property management costs in relation to your total revenue? From a tenant management, how satisfied are your tenants? How many complaints are you dealing with? Are the complaints all about the same thing? What are you doing about addressing those complaints? From a maintenance point of view, what are you spending on maintenance? What are the types of maintenance complaints that are you getting in? If there's a lot about taps that are broken, have you put the right type of taps in? They're not durable, that type of thing. So that reporting system at the board level has got to be in place, and you must monitor your performance, because you also, if you don't meet the benchmarks for, say, rent collection or vacancies, the Shrine, in any case, is going to place you under administration, right? If you don't fix those up. So better you have that in your system. Can we move on? From an organizational development point of view, we're trying to work out what you do before your rental comes in. This potentially would be a first generation organogram. There's a board of directors. One of them is an acting CEO. The board provides the strategic direction. They've developed the organization. They put the organization performance system in place. The CEO ensures that they get to accreditation, that the first project is developed, that you are gearing up the organization. So while the project is under construction, at least 12 months before construction ends, he brings in a finance manager, he brings in a letting staff, and he asks John for the second grant, which is your staff gear up grant, to pay those salaries. And then the letting officer starts to market the project, and the finance manager starts managing the grant monies that are flowing and the payments to the contractors and all of those good things. And then the CEO is also responsible for operations management, just to see that the company is meeting whatever you set out to do in the strategic business plan. So that potentially could be an interim arrangement while you don't have rental revenue, while you establishing the organization, getting the accreditation, getting the grant money in, getting the first project delivered. Can we move on? Your second generation organogram. This would be when your rental cars come in, your 500 units has been delivered. This is potentially what your organization should look like. Your CEO now is not acting anymore. There's a full-time CEO. There's an administrator stroke PA stroke secretary in place. That person is not only servicing the CEO's office, but also servicing the 3 managers that are put in place. There's a finance manager that has a bookkeeper that has to do rental administration. There's a credit controller that is phoning people every day to collect rental. And there's a front office receptionist that receives clients. There could also be an office assistant there that does the cleaning of the office and makes the tea and does those things, right? What you're outsourcing here then on the finance side is you're outsourcing HR management, possibly including your payroll. You're outsourcing ICT. You have a business information system that you contracted in. So those are outsourced providers. Then you have a client services manager in place. That person has a letting officer and a tenant liaison officer. So the letting officer is continuously letting the units, and the tenant liaison officer is the person that's talking to the tenants, making sure they pay their rent, they behave, they meet the requirements. If we say there's no pets, there's no pets. If we say there's no subletting, they're monitoring that subletting arrangement, right? They work hand in hand with the housing supervisor that's working under the property manager. And in the early stages, the housing supervisor does small maintenance works as well, potentially lives on site and sees that tenants behave in a certain manner. And because it's a greenfield project, there's a gardener and a cleaner in place. Outsourced is the developer role, the HR role, the IT role, the security of the complex is outsourced, and any large maintenance that comes up. But we shouldn't have large maintenance in the first 5 years because our project is new. The contractor would have handed over. We shouldn't be seeing any large maintenance works, but things do happen. We may have decided we used the wrong taps, and early on we decide we're going to change all the taps, and it's a big job. So now you've built your second project, you've built 500, you built another 500, you have 1,000 units under management. Potentially this is what it could look like, and this is how your organogram then evolves. We still have your CEO. Your CEO now has a personal assistant. There's a project development manager with a clerk of works in place. They are merely acquiring land, packaging the land, packaging the project, seeing construction. You have a pipeline of 500 projects every 3 years. They are dedicated to just growing your organization. Your finance manager turns into a corporate services manager. He has a finance manager under him. He has an HR officer, an IT officer. The finance manager still has the responsibility of a bookkeeper, credit. There will be more than one bookkeeper, more than one credit controller. There's a receptionist still in place, and there's also potentially office assistants. You may have more than one office now. You may have an office by the one project, an office by the other project, and you may have a head office where the top management is sitting. And so you may already have 3 offices in play. You may have 3 office assistants as well. You have a client services manager in play. that person would have hired an additional person called a community development officer, who is now responsible for community development programs at each of your projects. So they service all the projects. They're not based only on one project. You would have more letting officers and more tenant liaison officers in each of your projects. And generally, you would say that each tenant liaison officer should manage about 250 units each, right? So you've got now 1,000 units. You may have 4 tenant liaison officers. You then have your property manager, who has now maintenance officers in play. The clerk of works falls out because we have a property development manager, right? So he's got his clerk of works there. So this needs to come out. You may have housing supervisors. You may have 2, one living at the one estate, one living at the other estate. And you have gardeners and cleaners at each estate. It may be more than one. So you're still outsourcing security, and you're still outsourcing large maintenance, but you're outsourcing much less because you brought IT in, you brought HR in, you've brought much of the other stuff in the second organogram now into your business. So this is how you need to think about your establishment phase. How is your business going to evolve? It's based on the number of units, what you want to do in-house versus what you want to do outsource. Your systems, we spoke about the policies that you need in place. This is now the policies besides the policies that you need to have for your governance arrangement. You need a tenant management policy, property management policy that covers rent management, asset management, maintenance management, facilities management, utilities management, and vacancy management. You need a financial management policy and procedure. Internal management policy and procedure should cover strategic management, which includes strategic planning, HR management, communication management, IT management, business information management, and document management. Those are the types of internal controls. All those things are covered in that policy. Sorry, and then a property development policy. Remember that important for you is the institutional arrangements that you have in place. Let it rather be formal. Do not say that I'm going to talk to Shra when I feel I need to talk to the Shra, because if you haven't got a relationship with the Shra, when you knock on their door, they're not going to remember who you are, right? The same with the province, the same with the municipality. And so rather you say to yourself, I want to meet with the Shra quarterly, with the accreditation unit or with the project development unit. I want to have a conversation about my pipeline of projects that I want to have funded. And I want to have a conversation with the accreditation unit about compliance conditions that I have. So that you have you're keeping abreast of those that are important to you. Because if you don't have a relationship with the Shra, you are not going to get your funding. You're not going to be regulated well. You better work with them to see that you can get the money for the grants and that you can continue to maintain a good accreditation rating. From the province, it's more about them supporting your project. The municipality, the same thing. You want land, you want infrastructure, you want rebates from them. Keep to, even if it's an annual meeting after you establish, attend the PSC meetings. You want to engage with other SHIs. You can either do that through NASHO, which is an association of social housing institutions where they do advocacy work on your behalf. They do training as well. They also do capacity building and so on. Or you can just decide, who are the top SHIs in the country? I want to have a relationship with them. I want to see how they do things. When they're making changes and making improvements, I want to be able to be talking to them. Even me as a person outside of the space, I talk to the top SHIs on I think even a monthly basis. I ask them, how are you doing with rent collection? What is changing in your environment? So for instance, when you attend the next training around the business of social housing and how to be accredited, we play a video with one of the top, the CEOs of one of the top SHIs. And he gives us pointers about how he goes about collecting rental and how he collects 95% rental, even in COVID times, and what he did to be able to maintain that rent collection rate. So it's important that you also have that relationship with other SHIs, because you're not reinventing any wheel. You don't have to pay school fees for anything or most things. You must have a relationship with the funders. From a property management point of view, have a relationship with other NGOs and CBOs, because when you bring your tenants into play, you must remember that they come in with a whole lot of social ills and they're poor people. So you have a relationship with Sanka or Santa or the AIDS, the attic and those places, because if you need help with tenants who are having problems, you can then call on these to come and provide counseling, because remember, you're not a born social worker. You can't try and assist people that are dealing with drug abuse or alcohol abuse or whatever the case may be. Rather have a relationship with the AA so that they can come in and help and deal with people with alcohol abuse and so on. We say have a relationship with universities, attend their free fora that they have when they're producing. So especially the construction side of things, where they, they do a lot of research about new construction methods, the new greening stuff, what works better and all of that. Go to those fora, have a relationship with them, with the local university in your area where you're operating, so that you can also get sight of what is the latest happening in construction. But also just they do demand studies. They do have students that are doing postgraduate studies that have to do practical work. I mean, if you want to do an annual tenant satisfaction survey, why don't you get some postgraduate studies as part of these studies to come and do it for you, right? You're not going to pay anything to them because it's as part of it's a win-win situation. You get it for free. It's independent. It's not your staff knocking on the doors. At the same time, it contributes towards their work that they have to submit as part of their learning. So that's an important institutional arrangement to also have at a local level. You have to think about your office setup as well. Where do you want your office to be? It's no use you having an office in Sandton and you're catering for people that are living in a township somewhere, and that's where your project is. They're going to have to take how many taxis to get to you to come and fill in an application form, right? But you also may want to think is, where is my head office going to be with my senior management? And am I going to have a site office everywhere where I have a project? So my staff dealing directly with the site, dealing with applications, dealing with complaints, dealing with maintenance, they are then housed in an office on site. And so they're easily accessible to tenants. Tenants wouldn't have to go anywhere. They would walk to that office. So you've got to think about that, and you've got to think about the cost related to it. You also have to think about your office infrastructure. So when you buy your first computers, what BIS, what business information system are you going to use, MRI, what is the software requirements? So it's no use buying a computer and buying a certain software package, and then it's not meeting the requirements of the business information system that you're going to have to run. So you've got to think about the office and the office setup and the office needs as well during the establishment phase. Even though you're not going to be procuring an office early upfront in that stage, you're probably going to be getting it in your gear up stage. You've got to think about it. I mean, we also worked with an SHI that had the building was the head office, the site office, and the units were in the same building. And they had the CEO's office and the head office staff right in the front by reception. And then they had the client services manager and the property manager at the back somewhere. So tenants would have to walk through this, the part that housed the back office staff to get to the front office staff. It didn't make sense, So you got to think about that. You also got to think about if there's a rent boycott and there's angry action by big components of the tenants, what are the safety aspects that you want to have for your management team, and where do you want access of tenants to that section of your building blocked off? You got to think about all those things. These things happen by design. They don't happen by accident. Otherwise, you are going to have problems going forward. Okay, so let's talk about some of the services that you're going to offer. You will hear this in the next training session, but maybe because it's not planned in the immediate future, let's talk about it quite quickly. So on the tenant management side of things, we separate it from property management. We say there's 3 key phases to tenant management. There's what you do before a tenant becomes a tenant. There's what you do while the tenant is a tenant. And there's things that you have to do when the tenant moves out. So if we look at the pre-tenancy phase, so in the pre-tenancy phase, your work actually starts before you market a unit. Remember, the project development unit will design your project. They will say how many 1, 2, and 3 bedrooms there must be. If client services, who is responsible for tenant management, is not participating in that forum that's designing that project, because the tenant manager knows better what type of units you need, what people like, what people don't like, what works and what doesn't work, right? From a design and layout point of view. So for instance, the first project I built, we built the blocks. It was built in a certain fashion, and we put the playground in the corner of the project away from all the buildings. We put them in there, far in the corner. And no children played in that playground because the parents perceived it to be dangerous to go there. It was by the periphery. It was by where there was a gate where people could walk in and out. And behind that periphery fence was big bush, right? So we didn't think about that. And it was difficult to fix that up going forward because there was no space between the blocks to create recreational areas. So you can't make those mistakes up front. So the client services manager must influence the development of the project because they know what people like, what people don't like, what people use, what people don't use. The same with parking. We put the parking all against the perimeter fencing. What did the people do at night? They drove their cars up to the front door and parked their car there, drove over our paving and our grassed areas and that to put their car under the front door, right? Because they perceived the parking to be far away from the units and not to be safe because it's near the perimeter fencing. So those are the things that client services must influence because they know how tenants are behaving in the project. They can better tell the project development manager how things should be. They must then market the units, right? Way before construction ends. You can't wait for construction to end and now say you're going to advertise on the radio and advertise in the newspaper and put up boards and do whatever you need to do. You're then going to have 6 months of vacancy because it's going to take you that time to get an application in, get it screened, get the lease agreement, get the tenant to pay the deposits. By that time, your units are sitting vacant. You're not earning any rental. You can't afford that. So you market your units. From a marketing perspective, you have to be clear as well. We've spent, like in those days, my first project I did in 1998, we spent something like 35,000, which is worth about 350,000 in today's time, on big adverts in the local newspaper, and we had 1 or 2 or 5 responses coming from that. The biggest response was people walked past our site and people saw the signboard, they saw it. So it was by word of mouth or seeing the signboard, which was free because we put that signboard up in any case when construction started. I'm just load shedding, so I'm also trying to get myself connected to my other device so that I'm not cut out of this meeting. John, sorry for the delay. So my laptop doesn't go on. Okay, so I'm sorted. So your marketing avenues, you must be clear about. You want to do a show house. You want the contractor to deliver 1 block as early as possible, have a show house so that people can walk in, see what it looks like and decide what they want. Do you want to spend money on newspaper adverts where not many of your target market reads the newspaper? Do you want to go on the radio, on the community radio stations? Do you want to put flyers out at the shopping malls? Yes, those are the things that are cheaper. Those are the things that will bring you greater impact. Decide on your marketing strategy. Then it's dealing with applications. So before you even hand out an application form, you must be able to talk to the person inquiring, explain your rental, explain its social housing, explain what the units look like, explain what the rentals are like. Give as much information of what the qualifying criteria is before you give out an application form. Otherwise, you'll be giving out millions of application forms. You will be getting hundreds back only, and you would have wasted money. Remember, this whole pre-tenancy work that you do comes at a cost, but you're not generating any income from it. It's only during tenancy where the tenant is paying rent where you're generating. So you want to try and cut the cost, but you also want to do a good job in the pre-tenancy. You don't want to cut any corners. Once an application comes in, how do you register it? It can't be laying somewhere there on a desk and you lose half of it and some of it ends up in the bin and you don't know what's going on. Immediately it gets captured onto your system, if it's MRI or whatever system you're using, and you register it, because if your allocation policy is on a first come first service basis, it is actually down to the minute that the application came in, right? Because you could have had 5 people standing in line, and it is who was registered first, second, third on that day, in that hour, that will determine who gets a unit next that becomes available. So the registration process is absolutely critical to go onto a waiting list so that you know who's next in line for the next unit that comes up. And then there's the whole screening process. So better first start with the subsidy screening. Are you a South African citizen? Have you not owned a property before? All those over the age of 18, all the requirements of the human settlements or the housing code requirements, right? And then you move on to your affordability screening. So, and I mean, there's lots of lessons we learned there. You know, a person can type up their own payslip. They can put a phone number of their friend to say, that is the phone number of the company that I work for. You phone that person says, yes, he's working here. In the meantime, that person is your brother or your cousin if there's no real company, right? So you can't just go on the basis of a payslip. Also, when you look at the payslip, you must be able to see how all the statutory deductions being made. If it's not being made, it's a suspicious payslip. If there's no UIF and PAYE and all those things on, you already know you're dealing with something fraudulent. The best way to check employment and income is to do your credit check with TPN. They will confirm the employer. They will confirm your income. They will confirm your credit status. The other important way of checking is the bank statement. A bank statement is the most powerful way of checking affordability because it shows your money coming in and it shows how you spend the money. So your salary comes in today and tomorrow all your debit orders are unpaid because you went to the ATM and you drew out your whole salary. It tells you the behavior of that person, right? So the bank statement is important affordability check. So do that screening properly. Once the person has been screened, you would have regret letters that go out to those that don't pass, and you would have others that are successful. That then moves on to pre-tenancy training, which is unique to social housing. We don't just give a person a lease agreement and say, go and read what your roles and responsibilities are there in the lease agreement. We don't assume that. We know we're dealing with poorer, lower income, less educated tenants. And so we have a pre-tenancy training program. We then talk about our roles and responsibilities, their roles and responsibilities, what their rights are and what our rights are, and it's all known up front. Generally, it's a training session where you bring about 20 aspirant tenants into a room and you take them through the various models, the tenant management model, the rent management module. So the rent management module will say, rent is due on the 1st of the month. You will get your account on the 25th of the previous month for the 1st of the month. By the between the 1st and the 3rd, we'll have someone cold calling you if you don't pay. By the 3rd, we'll be issuing you a notice to say that we intend to terminate because you haven't paid. By the 7th, you'll actually get a termination notice. So we don't have much days in between the time because we're only holding 1 month's rent deposit. We don't have long periods of time where we wait for 2 weeks before we send this notice and that notice like the private sector does, because we are living on in a marginal revenue basis arrangement. After the pre-tenancy training, the nice thing is then you can say, I have these 10 units available or these 300 units available. You are a 5-person household. You don't qualify for a nano, a bachelor, and a 1-bedroom. Here's my 3 types of 2 bedrooms. This is the range within which we've worked out you can afford. And so choose a unit. Do you want to live on the ground floor in that block? And whatever the case may be, right? So they choose the unit. You allocate the unit, you immediately now give them a slip to say, this is the deposit you need to go and pay, bring us the proof of payment. You need to, because we don't have prepaid electricity, you need to go connect to the municipality, bring us the proof that you paid the deposit, you've opened the account, all those good things, and you sign the lease agreement. And then on the day that the unit is vacant, you take that person to the site, you say, there's the playground, that's where you park your car. This is the community development programs that we run. If your children want to join, if you want to join the boot camp, there's the young ladies, they've got boot camp every morning at 5 o'clock, all those things. And here's your keys to your unit, and the maintenance officer is standing next to you as the client services person, and he does the pre-inspection, because the pre-inspection form has got to be signed by the SHI and the tenants, and it's got to be appended to the lease agreement, because it becomes the post-inspection form when the tenant moves out. It's a legal requirement of the Rental Housing Act. So that completes your pre-tenancy. You can see there's a lot of work that needs to be done there. And it's the period of time when you're not earning any money from that prospective clients yet, but you're spending a lot of your resources there in that space. You need to do it properly. You need to do it in a good way, because your first impression as an SHI is made in that stage. If the tenant has a bad experience there, they will always believe you bad. You'll always have problems with them because their first impression of you was bad. The second part of your client services management arrangement is the tenancy. So how do you communicate and liaise with your tenants? Are they clear? Are you talking to them all the time? Are you close to them? How do you deal with complaints management? Do they understand that complaints can't just be via, they see one of the staff members walking down the road in the project and they lodge a complaint, it's not written down, it's not remembered, it's not attended to. No, there's a form, or there's a electronic form that you can fill in. If it's an emergency, we deal with it straight away. If it's a responsive thing, within 3 days, but within 1 day, someone will come and look at it. The contractor will come and fix it, and there will be a sign-off between the tenant and the SHI to say they're happy with the quality of the work is done, the person can be paid that did the work. A proper system, they must understand the system, you must have communicated it, and it must work. How will you deal with non-adherence to the lease agreement? So we said there's no pets allowed, and then you found there's a cat or a dog in the unit. How are you going to deal with that? Non-adherence is also noise, news, having parties until 4 o'clock in the morning on a Friday night. All those things, how are you going to deal with it? How are you going to communicate? How are you going to deal with disputes? So there's disputes between tenants themselves, neighbors. There's disputes between the tenant and you as the landlord or your staff member. How is it going to be dealt with? You need to have a whole dispute resolution mechanism in place that could end up in the courts, or could end up that someone is being reported to SAPS for holding drugs in your units or so on. It's a broad, wide range of mechanisms that you need to build into the system. Then how are you going to deal with participation, empowerment, and community development? How are you going to establish programs? Who is going to run those programs? Remember, you must also not be leading on these things. You must just be the organizer. Tenants must be able to do these things themselves for themselves. That is empowerment. I always use the analogy of a soup kitchen. If you are going to say, I'm going to run a soup kitchen in my estate for the lowest of lower income groups every Friday, and if you're going to go and look for donations for the soup, you're going to make the soup, you're going to serve the soup, that is not empowerment. That is disempowerment. That is making them dependent on you every Friday to get a good meal. But if you want to turn the soup kitchen into an empowerment thing, you will set up a focus group of people within the estate. You will say to them, I'll teach you how to go and look for donations of products that are almost expiring by the SPA and the Pick and Pay and whatever. You will collect it. You will get a group of people together from within the site. Here's the space. Here's the equipment. You will make the soup. You will serve the soup. That is empowerment, because you're skilling those unemployed people within the estate to be able to make soup. Maybe they can get a job in a kitchen somewhere at some point in time. That's what we're talking about. And then there's the tenant satisfaction surveys that you need to do to make sure that you are close to your tenants, you understand what the levels of satisfaction are. around the product itself and around the services that you're offering. Your last aspect of tenant management is your post-tenancy stuff. So there's two ways a termination can happen. You can cancel a lease because they're not adhering or they're not paying their rent or there's an eviction. Or the tenant says, I'm moving on now from your estate, I'm terminating. Whichever way it is, there's a termination notice that's served. You as the SHI has the responsibility to say, I accept it. This is the process that will unfold. I will do an exit interview on this date. I will do a check of the unit. So when you moved into this unit, the walls were white. You decided to paint the lounge purple and the kitchen pink. You need to bring it back to white when you move out, right? So you're almost doing a post-inspection, but early on in the notice month, because it's normally a calendar month, the 1st to the 30th. The 30th, you have to move out. By the 5th already, you should be, by the 2nd or 3rd, you should be sending the letter to say, I accept it. This is the procedure you're going to have to follow. On the 5th, we're coming to do a post-inspection. We're going to identify what needs to be fixed, and we're going to identify what I must fix as the SHI, what you must fix as the tenant. And we're going to give you so many days. By the 25th, it must be done. If you haven't done it by the 25th, we will do it and we will charge you the cost to fix it. You will do an exit interview because you want to hear why they're leaving, where are they going to, what was the experience by you? Because remember, we said by word of mouth is your biggest free marketing tool. So if they're going to go and tell 100 other people, go there because I had a good experience there, you want to know that they're leaving satisfied. And if they're not leaving satisfied, you want to know that it's valid reason why they're not satisfied and how you're going to improve your service offering to address that dissatisfaction thing. There's the handover of the unit because remember, you can do a post-inspection on the 5th and the 25th, but the bed is still there. The stove is still there. You don't know if there's a towel broken under the bed or under the stove. You're only going to see that when the furniture's out. You must be able to then also be able to address those maintenance issues on the day of the handover of the unit where they give the keys back to you. And then legislated is the time period in which you must refund your deposit. So if there's no maintenance issues, within 14 days, the deposit must be refunded. If there's a maintenance dispute, it must be resolved within 21 days. And within 21 days, if there is anything due to the tenant, it must be refunded. So much of this, whether it's pre-tenancy or post-tenancy, much of it is legislated via the Rental Housing Act. You've got to do these things properly, and it all has an impact on tenant satisfaction. Can we move on to property management? I think that's my last slide. So there's a whole lot of property management as a wide range, right? We start with rental management. How do you set your rentals? We spoke yesterday about income-based rentals versus per square meter or unit type rental. You must set that up front before you even think of giving out an application form to a tenant. They must know how rentals are set. You must set your rent deposit. We have very little latitude here. Ideally, would like to take a 2 to 3 months rental deposit, but we can't because we're dealing with lower income people. So generally we accept 1 month. But what we have built in as insurance is to say every year that your rent goes up, you've got to top up your rent deposit. Because just imagine if you don't do that and they live there for 20 years. If their rental is 20,000 in 20 years time and they came in, it was 500 Rand, you'll only be sitting with 500 Rand. You won't even have a fraction of the current rental in as insurance. So you must say that it's equivalent to 1 month's rental. It's payable before you sign your lease agreement, and it will be topped up every year. When the rent increases, you will face a rent increase and you'll have to pay the top up to the rent deposit. You have to talk about rent increases. Is it annual? Which time of the year? Is it the anniversary of the lease agreement? Is it the financial year end of the SHI? If it's the financial year of the SHI, what happens to someone moving in a month before the rent increase? Are they going to face a rent increase in 1 month's time, or are they going to have a 13-month cycle? You need to say all of that in your rent increase system. When will you advise them? Is it 2 months before the time? Is it 1 month before the time? What is required? You have to be sure about your billing. Are you going to prepare your rent roll on the 25th of the month, send it out by the 26th of the month, so that by the 1st of the month, the tenant gets a rent statement? By the way, a rent account is also a legislative responsibility in terms of the Rental Housing Act. You have to send out either an account or a statement, right? Better to send out a statement, gives you an opening balance, raise your rent, payment that was made, closing balance. Now the tenant can see exactly what their situation is, especially in the case where there's arrears. How are you going to collect your rent? You know, the best SHI say we collect rent every day. We phone every day, we SMS every day, we send messages every day. We go and knock on the door every day. These are the things we do, but these are the intervals when we send out a notice. On the 3rd, we send out a arrear notice. On the 7th, we send out a termination notice. On the 15th of the month, we already handed over the account to the lawyers for eviction. This is the procedure for rent collection and credit control. You should also think about the payment methodologies that you're going to be using. So, you know, taking cash at the office is very risky. Allowing tenants to go and pay cash in at the bank is risky because they don't put the right reference numbers, and you have a whole lot of unallocated deposits that you need to sit and administer and sift through and find out, and some you never resolve. You know, are you only going to work on a preferred debit order system? Are you going to work on a what's this other thing called that you can pay it, Pick and Pay, Easy Pay system? This guy says he even has Yoko machines, so you can come to the office and swipe your card and pay in at the office. What type of payment arrangements are you going to allow and prefer, and how is it going to work? That is so far as rental management is concerned. From an asset management point of view, every 3 years, the building condition audit needs to be done. It needs to inform the long-term maintenance plan. By the way, you need a fully costed long-term maintenance plan when the architect hands over the project when construction ends. That is your baseline. That long-term maintenance plan will tell you everything that's gone into that project, to the tap type, to the tile type, to the paint type, to the paint color and the code of that paint. All of that must be contained, must be handed over by the architect. So in your architect's brief, when they're building the first project, they need to have that component in, and you actually want it costed by a QS, and then you will make projections around using the rate of inflation or whatever indicator you want to use to project in. If I'm going to paint in 5 years' time from the date it was built, this is the cost of the paint and the painting in this year. Projected using the rate of inflation, it's going to cost me that. I have to build up a maintenance reservation over the 5 years to be able to fund that thing. So building condition audits strongly linked to long-term maintenance planning, strongly linked to maintenance reservation, because the maintenance plan is fully costed and it will tell you what you will need in every 5-year cycle. And so you must save that money every year to be able to do that thing every 5 years. You must insure the buildings. You must make sure that health and safety certification is in place. That means that you have to have a certificate every year, meaning that the provider, it's mainly around the fire hose reels and the fire equipment, that you need that certification in place. You have to service them, and then you will get certification on it. That is asset management. That is the owner of the property is responsible for that. I separate it out from maintenance and facilities management because that is a property management service that you're offering. You get complaints around maintenance only, and how do you get that work done within the specified period of time? How do you survey whether people are satisfied with rent management, maintenance management, and so on? How do you do inspections of your units? You can't wait for 3 years to do a building condition audit. You need to go into your units at least every 3 to 6 months, especially when you're dealing with projects that are aging, to go and see how people are behaving. Are they replacing the light bulbs that they're breaking? Is the toilet broken and they never reported it to you because they're using other mechanisms and so on? You need to do those inspections regularly as well. How do you manage the maintenance works? How do you budget for daily maintenance? How do you administer the maintenance aspects? So you've got to have a maintenance worksheet. Someone has got to go and confirm that that is the maintenance required. Someone has to go and do the maintenance. Someone has to sign it off. And once it's signed off, someone has to be paid for the work that they did. How is that whole system going to work? How are you going to deal with gardening and cleaning? Because facilities management is in there. And more than gardening, cleaning, it's about security. If you have a guardhouse and you have security officers working on the estate, how do you deal with the incidents reports? How do you get it every day? Why do you deal with it where there are incidents of theft or anything else that is happening? There's all of those facilities, your common drains, all the common areas, the stairways and the communal lighting on the site. How do you deal with those facilities management aspects? There's a whole host of things there. Then from a utilities management point of view, I would advise anyone doing a new project, put prepaid water, prepaid electricity in. You take that risk out. You don't have to get a municipal bill that you have to still see whether the tenants are paying, whether the tenants have arrears, how you're going to collect it. Because remember, the Property Rights Act says it's the owner of the property that is responsible for the tenant's utility bills. So better you know what those balances are, because at the end of the day, when the tenant moves out and you need to put a new tenant in, you have to pay the municipality before the new tenant can connect. They're going to want that amount and they're going to want it from you. So I advise put prepaid water and electricity. Yes, you're still going to get a bill for refuse and those things. Those you build in as a levy as part of your rental, you collect it via your rental, you pay it over to the municipality, so you know that you're in control of it. But you may buy an old building where you haven't done prepaid stuff and you may still have to ensure that the municipal bill is correct, that you collect that from the tenants and that you pay it over to the municipality on time. Then there's also your vacancy management, which is only dealing with turnover maintenance, right? Because letting will deal with putting a new tenant in, but it's about getting that unit in the shortest possible of time ready for the next person to move in. You cannot be taking a month and having a month's loss of rental because you couldn't get the unit repainted and the things fixed in it and the place stand empty and you're not earning money on it. When you hold 2,000 units and you're having a turnover of 10%, you're having 20 units turning over every month. Imagine losing rent on 20 units every month. It's just not affordable. So you have to ensure that your turnover maintenance systems are in place and that you're actually dealing with the maintenance in the month that that person that's moving out, you're dealing with the bulk of it at that time. And that on the day they move over, literally within 12 hours, you're doing the balance of the maintenance work. So the first of the next month, someone moves in. The unit is not empty. So that is just to give you some sense of the business that you're going in and how you have to manage your core business, which is tenant management and the core aspects of property management. John, I'll stop there.
Hey.
I'd like you to fly the next slide because after having said all of these things,
yeah,
it may chase people away. And
it's
so,
a lot.
Yeah, so go to the next slide. I think it's the black slide.
Let's see. Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
There we are.
So that's what I always say to everyone that we talk to. Why is it disappeared? Mandela said, it always seems impossible until it's done. It's doable, guys. It's not impossible.
Okay. This, ladies and gents, brings us almost close to the end of the last 2 days. Hafi's right, it does feel like a lot. And I did see that in the last, at least 2 parts of this presentation today, we're starting to delve more also into the other topics, for which we have separate sessions for. I want to do 3 things as we conclude. Let me not rob you of a chance to ask questions. So we'll have a 5 minutes Q&A at most. And then I'll ask that we do a quick evaluation. I'm going to post on the chat line the link that you can just click on and answer the 5-6 questions by literally just choosing the right option that represents your views. and then I'll come back and just wrap it up in terms of where to from here. But let's start with a Q&A. Nosi, you're the first. Let me just enable your mic and then just unmute yourself, and Sithembiso will be the next. Let's hear you. Nosi.
Hi, thank you so much, Kathy and John. So I don't know if I missed it, but you had promised that you will kind of show us the mix of the units in a typical development, if you can still help us with that. And as you were talking, I was quickly just doing some calculations. This is just a comment. And I'm calculating on a 300 unit development using the averages, like, 5% around 722, 25% will pay around 1460 in rent. The collection is going to be like $1 million that you get on rent per month. And then you've got all that stuff that you must have, the people that you must have, the gardeners, the managers, the CEO. You must pay your board by that time because you're collecting rent. You must pay NHFC if you got your bond from them. And there's absolutely nothing left. It's really quite a tight squeeze. Yeah.
Nosi, so if you look at it right, you are going to pay 550,000 per unit times 300 units, and that's going to be your capital cost, right? Of that capital cost, you're going to get 428,000 in as a grant from the SHRA, and the balance you are going to, which is about 110,000, you're going to take a bond at the NHFC on per unit. Then from an OPEX point of view, you're going to get an average 3,377 income. That will be times 300, right? And your average cost is going to be the 1,550 plus the bond servicing of another 900 odd rand, meaning that you're going to have a surplus, and that takes those staff that we put in the organogram suitable for a 300 unit project and so on. You're going to have 108 rand a unit times 300 units. So yes, you are working on a tight ship and you're going to have to manage those costs, but yes, you're going to be having a board in place who receives a board. You are going to have staff in place that can do the job. You're going to cover all your direct property costs. It's certainly doable, and it does end up with a surplus. Now that surplus as you go on, and that's the secret is that, but year on year you are packaging a 300, another 300, your revenue increases, your surpluses increase. It's like a effect. You're to continue growing your number of units, and your net surplus grows as well on an annual basis. It becomes less of a tight business and more one you can manage yourself well. And, John, if you can stop your screen, I just want to share the ideal unit mix and does comply with the SHRA. And so, on that score, remember we said we're going to send you the manual that gives you the recommended mix. But look at it, we saying you can do a small 5%, you can do a bachelor another 5%, you can do a 1 bedroom at 10%, you can do 3 bedrooms that are varying in sizes from the smallest to the biggest. You'll do 10, 20, 30, and then you'll do a 3 bedroom unit at 20% of your project. So you'll divide your 300 units by these percentages. You will get a mix, right? So this smallest 2 bedroom will go to that 5% here. A part of the bachelor and the 1 bedrooms will also go to this 30%, and then these other units will go to that 70%. So it's how you allocate this mix against these 5 target markets. I'm going to do a better one than this yet that shows a correlation of units and the income groups it's going to service. And I'm going to send you that as part of our handouts.
Thank you so much.
Can we move on?
All right, Tembisa, you are next. Just please quickly unmute yourself and let's take your question or comment.
Yeah, thanks for the past 2 days. It really has been, you've clarified a lot. Yeah, I had a lot of questions rustling in my head. And I guess my last question just pertains to staffing the board and the CEO, because obviously normally these things like outside of the social housing space are just done by separate entities, and those entities just raise a fee. So you'd find your CEO comes from a development background and someone else comes, so obviously they just raise a fee from all this. So I guess my first question just pertains to, like, for instance, things like the board. Could you possibly collapse certain roles? Like I look at client manager, or what was referred to in property as a leasing manager, and the property manager and the development. So if you've got someone who comes from all those backgrounds, could that person just simply see to that? And the second role, like this finance and HR role, you could collapse that and that becomes one person. So you probably have like 2 people on your board opposed to 5 salaries. I don't know, I'm just trying to streamline my costs, I guess. And also it speaks to things like that board. Is it just oversight? What is that contrast between the board and the CEO? Because as I said, normally in normal schemes, you'd have an owner, you have a developer, you'd have a manager and a leasing manager. And the CEO of that company would either come from one of these disciplines and that's how they'd make their money, opposed to what you've done now is all these fees have been raised and now you've created another onogram for a whole different staff. I don't know if you follow my question, ma'am.
Yeah, I totally get it. So remember, we're starting a organization that is capable of acquiring, developing, owning, and managing social housing stock.
Yes.
So it has to have a governance structure in place that provides strategic direction and oversight. So it's non-executive. It doesn't earn anything. In most cases, you would find the board of directors of social housing institutions are voluntary positions.
Okay.
They may earn a stipend per board meeting. They meet 4 times a year. They're advisory in nature. They're not operational at all. There's no real cost component to them.
Okay, right.
The reason why we create the governance structure is that it must mirror the management structure, so that when the finance manager comes to report to the board on rent collection, on vacancy management, on debt service cover ratio, on liquidity and solvency, there is someone in the board that can provide technical oversight. Because the finance manager can feed a board that doesn't have a finance skill on the board any nonsense, and the board won't be any the wiser that the company is going down, right? So we're saying the board skills must mirror the management skills, so that when the management reports to the board as an oversight layer of the organization, they must be able to say, this is nonsense you're bringing us, you are lying to us, this is not what it is. Or if they say rent collection is 95%, but they look at the income statement and they see, but that number doesn't add up to 95% of what you raised, they can ask that difficult question and say, but you are lying to us because you're not collecting 95, because the numbers in our income statement tells us a different story. You understand? So there's a reason for governance, and I may tell you that the biggest failure in social housing is around governance failure, because the board does not provide strategic direction and does not provide sufficient oversight, and they abdicate that responsibility to the management. So we want to see a governance structure. It should not come at a cost, and it should be a minimal cost if it does have a cost component. It's a not-for-profit business. You should try and get volunteers with that type of experience. They're literally giving you 2 hours 4 times a year, because you shouldn't be meeting more than that. You shouldn't be meeting more than quarterly. Four board meetings a year is the minimum requirement in terms of the Companies Act. Then your management team, yes, you can. We spoke about consolidating roles where the disciplines are similar. So the property management and property development, all being technical aspects, could be consolidated. Because HR and IT and administration is not your core business, you could consolidate that all under a finance manager and choose someone that has a qualification more than just financial management, right? So you can do that, but the two areas where you cannot consolidate is client services manager. It's a very peculiar functional area, peculiar to social housing. With the community development component, you must have that. If you don't do that work, you will not be successful. We are absolutely sure about that. The second biggest failure is around tenant management aspects, because you can say my rent collection is 60% and it's supposed to be 95%, and I'm going to be more strict about credit control. Credit control doesn't get you the money in. It is the client services department that goes and sits down to find out why people are not paying, provide educational things to them because they don't know how to budget, or they have problems, they're not going to work, they're absent, they're not earning the salary they should. It's about dealing with those softer social issues that addresses rent collection. And so client services can never be separated or consolidated with anything. And likewise, we say property management can be consolidated with property development, but can't be incorporated elsewhere. We also see that when the CEO comes from a particular background, you would find that SHI is stronger in that. So where the CEOs are coming, the engineers or architects or whatever, you see the development role, they play a big emphasis on it, and they're weak on the management role, collecting the rent and that, because that's not in their makeup. And then you see when you hire a person with a finance skill, they're obsessed with the back office stuff and not the client services stuff. They don't see the value in it. So it's very difficult to find a CEO that's all-rounded, or that you'll have to build, that the board will have to see that they build a CEO that comes from a specific discipline, but that cuts across the entire business and values the entire business value chain. So there's a clear distinction between governance and management and staffing.
Okay, I guess sorry about hopping. These are my last two questions, just as a follow-up. So so obviously I understand that, because obviously I'm just trying to structure this in my head. So I understand that obviously the board is a voluntary role. So your CEO, would there be a remuneration of some form? And I guess my second question is really, when I read the criteria of let's say client services, it speaks to me like a leasing manager, or in that sense of the word. Am I correct to equate the two?
To a point, but it's much more than that because of the community development focus.
Okay.
It's much more than a leasing manager or a property manager in your world, in the world outside of social housing.
Sure.
A client services manager is more a person that has a social worker qualification.
Okay.
And does leasing management as part of it, but the community development aspect is the main aspect.
Okay. Okay.
And then
I was asking, obviously, with the CEO, is there remuneration? Because obviously this guy is
all the staff members are paid, and I may say to you, they may earn below market salaries at the first project, but certainly, like I said, as you grow your projects, these CEOs are well-paid CEOs. They earn market-related salaries. So the secret is growth in the number of units that you have, because with that growth takes your entire structure to be market-related.
Okay. Okay. No.
We have CEOs that earn over R1 million.
Okay.
And well over R1 million. Okay. So it becomes market related, but you may have below market related salaries for the top management in the first project. But as they grow the stock for you, so will their salaries move towards being market related.
Okay. No. Yeah, I'm just trying to understand the business. Okay, you've helped me. Thanks for your help, man.
Okay, that was the second last hand. I see James is the last one, but I see that you say you have posted your question on the thing. I'll just read it out just shortly. But mindful of the time, I see we're 10 minutes already out. I think because of that 15 minutes late start, this is another repercussion. But let me ask us, we do this. I've just posted the link for that evaluation. If you just click on the link, it opens up and I think there's a button that start the evaluation or something. There are 5-6 questions there, and can I ask that you comments with that, colleagues, just as we deal with James' 2 questions. James asks on the chat, I think it's more governance related, but you'll give some clarity on it. Can these directors include actively employ? Well, I guess he wants to say people who are actively employed elsewhere or holding other directorships in other organizations. And he further says, or government or SOEs. So that's the first part of his question. The second part says, is it also possible that an SHI can do all roles from a development to management without outsourcing other roles? So those are the 2 back-to-back questions from James.
Okay, so before I continue to answer, has everyone been able to access the questionnaire, the evaluation form?
Yes, we've been able to.
Okay, so that's great. So on the second question, it's
well, it's about the employment status of
yes.
the directors.
Yes. And the second one?
And the second one is whether the SHI can just do everything internally instead of outsourcing.
Yeah, so the second answer is easier. Yes, you can do everything internally. The only thing I recommend that you don't do internally is security. Because of all the legislative requirements of weapons and all those things, you don't want to take on that responsibility. So that's the only thing I recommend that you outsource. You can do everything else in-house. The first question is you can draw from any, as long as the person is not in the employment of another social housing entity or in the employment of government, you can choose anybody, because remember your directors are volunteering. So they will have their day jobs. They will either have a business, as long as they're not servicing the social housing sector and they are not working in government, because prohibited is any government officials. And we're talking of SOEs are included, government agencies are included, all of those. So yes, you can be employed. Yes, you can have other businesses, and yes, you can hold other directors, because you're getting a stipend to come in here. You're going to get a very low board fee. It's not going to be market related. I hope that answers your question.
There is a hand from Tracy. I guess it relates to the question that she's also posted on the chat. But maybe Tracy, if you want to pose your question.
Yes, just briefly, when you were talking about the tenant satisfaction surveys, how often would you conduct those?
So I would say, remember, you do your strategic planning a quarter before your year end, right? To come up with your new budget for the new year and your new plan for the new year. But it's linked to your 5-year plan. So if you want to do a proper strategic review of how you performed in this last business plan, your last financial year, I would say a month before you do your business planning for the year, I would do a very small tenant satisfaction survey. And I mean, we can share templates with you where you ask very basic, maybe 5-6 questions at the most. You get the university involved, you get their students to come and do it. So you keep your staff out of it so people can feel free to answer. They don't feel that they can't say something bad about you because you're going to treat them bad afterwards. And then you use that results as part of your strategic planning or your business planning for the next year. Because then when you have high dissatisfaction levels with maintenance, you start interrogating, so what is not working? Why are the people unhappy with it? And you find out, no, you're not getting to them in time, or there isn't a quality check built into the system. So the thing, you go back 3 times to fix the same thing. Mm-hmm. So it's a small questionnaire, rather get it done independently. And you don't have to do 100% of your units. So I work with a professor on tenant satisfaction surveys, and he says to me, if you do a random survey, you don't pre-select any units, you knock on doors. When you get to 33 1/3% of doors that have completed the survey, you can stop, because every percentage that you go over 33 1/3%, you're going to get the same answer. So this is even a smaller job, right? You only do 33 1/3, but it's got to be random. You mustn't have pre-selected because you know those 10 units are happy with you, so you're going to knock on those 10 doors. It must be absolutely random. You start by unit number 1, and when you get 33% of the survey completed, you stop knocking. And you use that results to inform your strategic planning for the next year. Because if your maintenance is weak, then you're going to have a strategic objective that improves maintenance in the next 12 months. Then the 3 yearly one is SHRA has got the questionnaire already, and they actually pay for the survey for you. They do it with you. They do it with their own service provider. And it's a big one. So they ask much more questions and you get a better sense. So that one will be built in your next 5-year strategy. Right?
Okay.
Because that is the big one, and that gives you a bigger view of tenant satisfaction, and that allows you to do take bigger decisions about bigger problems that may occur. I hope that helps you answer the question in a very practical sense.
Brilliant, thank you.
Okay, I am assuming that most of you would have finished the evaluation. If not, please, if there's anything that I would plead with everyone to do before you log out, is to just give us the feedback so that we get a sense where can we strengthen our delivery in terms of this offering. I'm also wanting to then conclude on this following. Do look out for the mail shot from my side. It'll have a number of handouts ahead that you need to be sent. The list of the restructuring zones. You will receive this PowerPoint presentation of the last 2 days. You will also receive the manual or the guide that speaks to everything in detail. You'll also receive a list of the PSCs. Remember, the PSCs being that provincial structure where you would present your potential projects and where everyone across the spheres of government is present and other stakeholders. You'll also receive the link to these recordings. That is probably what's going to delay us sending this, because we still have to do some editing, for example, taking out those silent breaks and things like that, so that we clean it up and send you a much more professional recording. You'll also will